They are heroes.
And they're going to space.
In 1963, the Cold War between the USA and the USSR intensifies, and nuclear war seems inevitable. Understanding that humanity could be wiped off the face of the Earth, President John Kennedy orders the development of a secret plan to ensure humanity's survival. A group of scientists creates the spaceship Ascension and selects 600 volunteers who are sent to Proxima Centauri with the task of colonizing the planet. But the journey will take hundreds of years, meaning generations will succeed one another. 2 generations later, the ship is mainly inhabited by the grandchildren of the first astronauts, and the environment reflects the 1960s. In honor of the 51st anniversary of the launch, a grand party is held on the ship. Looking at the inhabitants, it seems the mission has been successful. People have obviously adapted to the living conditions. However, the first impression is deceptive, as social inequality exists here too. Wealthy and well-off families get good jobs and live on the upper decks, while the poor are limited in comfort. One day, a young woman named Lorelai picks up a package from the butcher and goes to swim on the artificial beach. But shortly afterward, a girl named Krista finds her lifeless body and alerts the ship with a loud scream. Despite the passing years, the chief engineer of the spaceship, who remained on Earth, is still alive. But now his place is taken by his son, Harris, who does everything to keep the Ascension project under tight security and monitors all news. Learning of Lorelai's death, Harris's assistant advises informing the project director, Catherine Warren. However, Harris fears that this could jeopardize the project and tarnish his father's legacy. Meanwhile, Dr. Juliette Bryce examines the dead body and finds strange marks on the deceased's wrists. The ship's captain, William, assigns the responsibility for investigating this case to the project executive director, Aaron Gall. He soon discovers one oddity: there is no image of Lorelai entering the beach. Later, Galt learns that Lorelai was seeing a guy named James Toback, who worked in water purification. He sets out to find him, but to no avail. On the same day, the forensic results show that Lorelai had been making love a few hours before her death. A bullet was extracted from her palate. This alarms Galt, since officially there are no weapons on board the ship. He immediately informs the captain of the news. Meanwhile, Krista has to be hospitalized, as she is shocked by the incident and says someone is watching her. But even as she begins to recover, the girl insists that there is no life in space, so they must return to Earth. She is also sure that Lorelai died because she learned something forbidden. Soon, Galt apprehends James Toback. The guy admits he saw Lorelai on the day of her death. However, she left abruptly after a quarrel, and he was not close to her that day. Galt and Toback go to the beach and start searching for clues. Suddenly, they stumble upon a hidden passageway that Lorelai apparently used, explaining her absence on the surveillance footage. Galt and Officer Duke inspect the discovered entrance and find the place where the girl was killed, as well as a book with maps of the water filtration system and blueprints of the navigation computer, which recently malfunctioned. It becomes clear that this is sabotage, intended to force the ship to return to Earth. Duke and his men descend to the lower decks, where the Butcher Stokes provokes a fight, but then an alarm sounds about an approaching powerful radiation storm. The order is given for everyone to take shelter in their capsules, but then the captain learns that the protective shields are jammed and sends Galt and an electrician to fix them. Thanks to their efforts, the door eventually closes. The electrician then confesses that he saw Stokes giving Lorelai a gun before she was killed. At the same time, Dr. Juliette puts Krista to bed and leaves her a seahorse-shaped necklace, claiming it will protect her. However, when the spaceship enters the radiation zone and everyone seals themselves in their capsules, Krista sees a strange man in a suit entering her room. After the ship safely passes through the radiation storm and everyone is allowed to exit, Galt and Duke go to the lower deck again, find a gun with Stokes, and take him into custody. The man is interrogated, but he continues to insist that he was framed because he is from the lower deck and it is easy to make him the culprit. Meanwhile, the door to Stokes' cell automatically opens. He exits and retrieves a hidden gun from his cabin. After the funeral, Galt speaks to the captain. William admits that he was close to Lorelai, but he did not kill her. It is then that Stokes appears, taking a random girl hostage. He demands a fair trial. Galt lunges at Stokes, freeing the girl. The captain quickly leads her to safety, while Stokes and Galt continue to fight. In the end, Stokes is ejected into space, but instead of instant death, he lands on an inflatable mattress where a group of people detains him. It becomes clear that the entire project is just a simulation, a test of the viability of generations of people in spaceflight. But the people on the ship believe they were sent on an important mission and have been flying in space for 51 years. Director Warren somehow learns about the recent events. Enraged, she storms into the Mission Control Center and warns Harris not to hide anything. Harris claims that Stokes is the murderer, but the director is not convinced, and she sends a consultant named Samantha Kruger to oversee the project. At the same time, an unknown man sets a bomb in the ship's cobalt generator, which explodes after some time. Harris and Kruger rush into the facility housing the spaceship. Fortunately, there are no reports of casualties, and the injured are taken to the medical center. Captain William inspects the explosion site and discovers graffiti on the wall, confirming it was a deliberate act. But fearing accusations of incompetence, he conceals the true cause. Outside, Kruger demands access to the surveillance footage. On the ship, Galt goes to the lower decks to meet with the person responsible for the generators, named Dwight, but he panics and attacks the director. Regaining consciousness, Galt continues the investigation and learns that the explosion that killed his parents 20 years ago was similar to the recent one. He hypothesizes that Dwight was likely involved in Lorelai's murder because Stokes didn't know how to use a gun, therefore he couldn't have killed the girl. Harris and his assistant learn that the other side of the deck is no longer airtight, and the team inside can hear sounds from outside. This creates a risk of exposure. Galt finds Dwight and a fight ensues, during which Dwight somehow manages to escape and start a bomb timer. Alarmed, Harris orders everyone to leave the area immediately. Fortunately, Galt manages to defuse the bomb, but Dwight dies. Kruger blames Harris for this, but he argues the goal of the project is to determine human capabilities. However, later Harris gives Dr. Juliet's necklace to his wife, indicating that he was the one who broke into Krista's room and stole the necklace. At the same time, Kruger begins her own investigation and discovers that several scientists involved in the Ascension project were found dead or went missing in the 1960s. Meanwhile, on the ship, everyone prepares for the next round of vaccinations, but Krista refuses the shot, convinced that they want to kill her. The librarian volunteers to take the shot instead, but after receiving the medication, she loses consciousness. Kruger demands an explanation, but Harris insists that these are routine immunizations and is concerned for the girl who didn't get the shot. He orders the medicine to be added to milk, but Krista figures out his plan and pours it out. Kruger meets with Eva, the author of a website tracking the fates of 1960s scientists. Eva claims the government used the project as a cover to abduct children for participation. Later, an unknown man pursues Krista and tries to forcibly vaccinate her, but he injures himself and stains the girl's dress with his blood, allowing her to escape. Galt takes her to Dr. Juliet and convinces her to get the shot. While preparing, Krista tells Dr. Robert Bryce about visions she's had lately. These include falling from a twin tower, a war in the desert, and tragedies in the ocean. She also claims to have seen Dr. Bryce in the maintenance tunnel where Lorelai was killed. The doctor becomes enraged, gags her, and administers the shot. Harris and his assistant, who saw this, are shocked that Krista described events that actually happened on Earth. Dr. Bryce finds a blood sample match from Krista's dress with his wife's student, Mesmer. However, the boy is found dead in his cabin. Kruger concludes that Harris has an accomplice on the ship who is causing disturbances and radiation storms. On the ship, the day of the lottery arrives, allowing the winning couple to have a child. Since population numbers must be strictly maintained, a new person can only appear after someone's death. And now 3 people have died. Soon the names are announced. Among the winners are Officer Duke and his wife. Krista notices a woman outside her cabin and follows her, but suddenly she realizes it's the ghost of Lorelai. At that moment, someone starts playing a video showing her tryst with Captain William. Everyone in the room laughs while Krista starts screaming uncontrollably. Harris observes this and notices that the girl began reacting even before the video played, as if she could see the future. He is amazed. His father predicted this phenomenon in 3 generations and called it morphic resonance. Kruger steals the keys to Stokes' cell, later presenting a report sharply criticizing Harris, prompting Director Warren to come to the project. While Kruger sneaks into Stokes' cell, he attacks her and takes her hostage, and there he learns the truth about the Ascension project. This shocks Stokes, leading to a mental breakdown. However, Kruger persuades him that they must escape before they are noticed and killed. She is willing to help him because the entire project is unethical. As they step outside, Stokes cries, but Kruger urges him to pull himself together. A guard approaches them, and they team up to neutralize him. In the process, Kruger gets injured. Stokes goes to the nearest store to buy medical supplies. They then go to a motel together. Warren and Harris learn about the escape and call security from the company TC, which turns out to have funded the project. The management is unhappy with the director's work and accuses Harris of covering up facts. Harris panics and begs Warren for a second chance, but it is in vain. On the ship, Duke learns that Galt has started investigating his wife, suspecting her of killing Lorelai. He loses his temper and confronts Galt. At the same time, Krista has another vision. She foresees a violent fight between Duke and Galt and runs to the beach. Anxious, she unintentionally uses telekinesis. However, she loses control of her power and shuts down all the ship's electricity. Warren blames Harris for the incident and orders her henchmen to get rid of him. Terrified, Harris talks about morphic resonance. It turns out that Warren has long awaited this result. They rush to the control center and learn that all the ship's systems shut down due to a power surge, but the artificial stars still shine. Harris's father embedded the starlights in the ship's nuclear reactor to ensure the illusion's eternity. Harris suggests using the nuclear reactor to restore the system's functionality. Meanwhile, Toback receives a weak TV signal and informs Dr. Bryce. However, the latter sends the guy away under a flimsy pretext, then turns off the screen. It becomes clear that he is Harris's accomplice. Kruger meets with Eva and explains everything to her. She plans to flee abroad and seek asylum before exposing the project's deceit. Eva tries to dissuade her, and Kruger realizes that the journalist also works for the TC company. Eva confesses everything and shoots Kruger. Stokes manages to escape. The oxygen on the ship begins to run out. Captain William and Galt go to the lower decks to activate the carbon dioxide scrubbers and declare a radiation storm for the others to conserve oxygen. Harris concludes that the chances of getting the ship back to working condition are extremely low, so Warren decides to extract Krista before she suffocates. William and Galt realize the scrubbers are beyond repair, so they decide to clean the air manually. Krista senses someone coming to take her. Dr. Bryce confirms this, and when Krista accuses him of killing Lorelei, he confesses. The woman learned about the fake mission, and he couldn't allow the exposure. Galt and William successfully distribute lithium dioxide throughout the ship using large fans, restoring oxygen levels. At that moment, Warren's envoy arrives, and Dr. Bryce tries to stop him, but the brute easily brushes him aside and grabs Krista. Galt sees Lorelei's ghost, who leads him to Krista. It turns out he has also developed resonance. Galt attacks the thug. Krista uses her power again, making the opponents dissolve into thin air. Seeing all this, Warren panics and tries to contact the envoy by radio. She moves closer to the ship, and Harris takes advantage of the moment to push her down, killing her. Galt finds himself on an unknown planet. The idea is generally good, especially for fans of detective fiction, and one can't help but wonder, what if Earth is the same kind of spaceship, and all the people on the planet are participants in an experiment? The movie begins with scenes of a mysterious alien flying through space in a spacesuit at the speed of light towards Earth to save his planet and landing somewhere in New Mexico. After crashing, the alien takes on a human form and, while naked, sneaks onto someone's property, prompting the owner to call the police. When the police arrive, they find a man with a water hose in his mouth, responding to questions with disjointed words in broken English. At the station, the man claims he is from another world on a mission, having just learned the language. He asks for water and then reads a name on an officer's patch, announcing his name is Faraday. Asked who can pick him up from the station, he names Justin Falls. Meanwhile, Justin is preparing for another shift at a toxic waste disposal facility. Once a promising scientist, she now takes care of her sick father and raises a young daughter. Receiving a call from the station, she goes there, but does not recognize the man. Faraday then starts quoting her scientific work and confesses he needs her for his mission. Puzzled but willing, she vouches for the strange man. They release him, and his first stop is a pawn shop, where he vomits a large amount of gold rings. After getting money, he buys an antique device to determine his next direction. Faraday stuffs the bills in his pockets, but fails to notice them flying away. Some guys in a passing car get out to rob him. Justin sees this and tries to help Faraday, but the robbers knock a weapon from her hands. Faraday then grabs the gun and fires randomly, scaring the thugs. Cursing herself, Justin puts Faraday in her car, and he speaks again about their joint mission, giving coordinates for a message reception. Needing money, she agrees. Soon they stop at a gas station where Faraday finds water containers and joyfully immerses himself into them. He then sees a horse corral and confuses Justin by saying that on his planet, horses are predators. On the road, they stop at a cafe where Justin tries teaching Faraday decent behavior, eventually labeling him autistic. Faraday then surprises her by writing a futuristic equation on a napkin taught by Thomas Newton, founder of World Enterprises. On Antea, Faraday's planet, two races exist. Newton's race, the knowers, who invent and manage, and Faraday's race, the drones, who obediently follow orders. They drive on, and Faraday reveals his world is dying, and Earth doesn't have much time left either. Tired of his seemingly delusional talk, Justin drops him off and leaves. Faraday walks towards his destination and soon sees a huge black cloud forming a tornado. Justin, also seeing this, turns back to find Faraday when he finds himself in the eye of this storm, teleported to a forest where he meets Thomas Newton, who is also an alien from Antea. Newton has learned to create spaces only certain beings can enter. He warns Faraday to stay away, as agents are hunting him. In response, Faraday reproaches the teacher because all of Antea was waiting for his return with water. But time passed, and there were fewer and fewer Anteans left. They considered Newton a traitor and even decided to erase his name from memory. But Faraday believes him. Then Newton advises Faraday to introduce a virus into Antea, which he calls humans, and most importantly, to see everything through the eyes of a human, but not to get attached to earthly life. He sets Faraday a goal: reclaim the company taken from him, because there lies the key to salvation. But he will need Justin's help. Meanwhile, the woman tries to take shelter from the hurricane in her car. Suddenly, everything calms down, and she sees Faraday in front of the car, looking intimidating and repeating only one word: origin. Terrified, Justin drives away. Faraday sets off on foot and soon reaches the familiar cafe. The waitress recognizes him, offers water, and finds out for him that Origin is a corporation in Seattle. Meanwhile, CIA agent Clay receives a dinner invitation from his boss and foster mother Finch. He recently made a mistake resulting in a child's death, and now only success in a new case can save his job. Finch tells him about the strange tornado, which was actually a dialogue in the form of signals sent and received from space, something that last happened 40 years ago. Back then, Dr. Papel, who now lives in Alaska, was involved. Clay must go there and find out everything he can. At the same time, Faraday takes a taxi to the airport and, realizing he needs documents for the flight, steals them from the driver. But upon entering the terminal, he suddenly feels very ill. The radiation from the passenger and luggage scanning systems affect him. He vomits a large amount of water and loses consciousness. Justin is called by the police to pick up Faraday, who is now in her jurisdiction. She arrives to find him pleading to be taken to Seattle, as the tornado was a message. She finally believes he is an alien. Faraday explains that the Origin Corporation has blueprints for a device that can save Antea. As a nuclear fusion expert, she can help him build it. Justin takes Faraday home and introduces him to her family. He is baffled by why people keep useless old people instead of disposing of them. At home, Justin's father Josiah plays his favorite jazz, which delights Faraday. Meanwhile, CIA agent Clay makes his way to Alaska and finds Papel's house, but he is immediately struck on the head and loses consciousness. The young man comes to, tied to a chair with his mouth taped shut. The mad old man cuts him to make sure he is human. Papel is convinced the agent came for the film. He starts to recall Newton, whom he turned into a psychopath. Then, Clay manages to free himself, but the old man grabs a rifle and, threatening the agent, suddenly shoots himself. At the same time, Faraday, sitting at a table, watches the traditional prayer in confusion, not understanding who Josiah is talking to. Josiah regrets his daughter abandoning her scientific work. Faraday cannot understand why she wastes her potential on a worthless old man. An upset Justin takes her daughter to a neighbor. Faraday stays with Josiah. He looks at the old man and then reaches out to him. Justin sees flashing lights and runs to the house, finding Josiah standing on his feet while Faraday convulses in a corner, saying they can now go to Seattle. Father and daughter rush to him and find the alien completely dehydrated. They carry him to the bathroom, where he drinks greedily. Then he suddenly falls. A black substance emerges from him, rises into the air, and disappears into the ventilation. After that, Faraday fully recovers. In the morning, Josiah, for the first time in years, gets himself ready and insists his daughter take Faraday to Seattle, gifting him a suit and a hat. On the road, Faraday explains they need to infiltrate the Origin Corporation's vault and find Newton's Newton's 10th project. The woman is skeptical, so Faraday asks to stop the car, approaches a long broken oil derrick, extracts a glowing sphere from himself, and inserts it into the machine's engine. The oil derrick starts working, and the alien explains that it is quantum synthesis, which can operate for hundreds of years. He used this energy to travel to Earth. Newton's project will provide the necessary energy, restore Antaeus' core, and enable the recreation of water. Earth is currently on the same path, and Justin was very close to solving the mystery. Meanwhile, in Alaska, Clay finds an old projector and a film reel showing an experiment on Newton, where his face was removed. The shocked agent burns down the old psychiatrist's house. Faraday and Justin stop at a hotel for the night. The alien lies on the water in the pool, looking at the stars, and predicts Earth's imminent doom. Then, Justin sets a condition. She will help achieve the goal, but the device's blueprints must remain on Earth. Faraday agrees and informs her that they need to find Hutch. It turns out Hutch is the dismissed brother of the Origin Corporation's manager. However, seeing Faraday's calculations on a napkin and hearing Newton's name, he refuses to have anything to do with them. Clay meets with Finch. He has traced Newton's entire path. The US government practically stripped Newton, who amassed a fortune and founded Origin, of everything, replacing him with their own person while torturing the alien himself. Newton then disappeared after speaking about the project. Now, another similar entity has appeared. Finch reminds him of the case's danger, but agrees to assign him the investigation, providing him with an analyst, Elizabeth. At that moment, Hutch finally comes to Justin and Faraday. He recalls Newton's projects and tries to convey to the pair what will happen if quantum energy is used on Earth. It would mean the death of the entire energy system, the ruin of oligarchs, and the closure of power stations. Who would let them do such a thing? Clay meets Elizabeth, who intercepted the last signal. Her file states she betrayed her own family. She reminds him of the child who died because of him. Clay realizes they are a team and orders her to track down the alien from the tornado. Hutch informs them that Origin is in London, but his relationship with his sister is very poor. Faraday suggests a demonstration of his quantum prototype. Hutch arranges a private plane to London. However, during the flight, Faraday's face suddenly starts to melt. Hutch barely manages to calm the stewardess, who is in shock after witnessing it. They arrive and infiltrate a club where scientific proposals are being presented. Faraday listens to a young scientist's presentation, but suddenly goes to the board and writes the correct formula. When questioned by the committee, he announces he came to demonstrate quantum synthesis processes. Seeing disbelief, he takes out the sphere, and instantly, all of London's electricity cuts off and then turns back on. The next day, the news goes global. Justin asks her father to come to London with her daughter Molly. Hutch receives numerous congratulations. Faraday is outraged by Earthling's wastefulness and the fact that there is nothing about his teacher Newton on the internet, as if his life was simply erased. Hutch decides to go to his sister's estate uninvited. Elizabeth tracks them and reports to Clay, showing him Faraday's airport photo. She is sure he is an alien. She also obtained information about a Mary, who was Newton's friend. Clay heads to the monastery clinic where she works. Faraday's team arrives at Hutch's sister's estate. Justin talks about the prototype that can light a city for almost a year using just a liter of water. Edie opposes, but then Faraday mentions Newton's name. Edie's son admits he has music recorded by the scientist on an old device and leads Faraday to his grandfather's study. At the same time, Clay arrives at the monastery clinic and meets Mary. Meanwhile, Edie's consultants bombard Justin with questions, making her feel unwell. During this time, Faraday receives a musical sphere and upon playing it, hears strange sounds. In the monastery, Mary recalls that Newton told her about his wife and begs Clay to protect the alien, as he is a miracle. Faraday realizes that the sphere contains Newton's farewell to his wife. It is so touching that tears well up in the alien's eyes, although he does not know what they are, and he throws the sphere away. Antaeans understand each other, but do not feel. Faraday wonders how humans can live like this. Meanwhile, Clay visits Edie and reminds her that her father was a CIA front. Therefore, she will have to make a deal with Faraday, who will build the required machine. Edie finds herself having to agree, but in retaliation, she tells everyone that Justin killed her assistant in an attempt to unlock quantum energy. The young man received a lethal dose of radiation because she didn't wait for safety confirmation. However, Faraday declares that he will work only With Justin, Edie is forced to sign the agreement. Justin admits that the deceased young man was the father of her daughter, Molly. Later, Faraday recalls saying goodbye to his family, his wife, and 2 children, and promising to return. He urges Justin to hurry, but she is determined to first bring her family here. Hutch and Faraday arrive at the research center, where all materials related to Newton's project are brought. Simultaneously, Clay's team sets up their laboratory, where they can monitor Faraday's work. He has become a real Steve Jobs, demanding high results from employees. Soon, his team creates a construction that will shield the device from electromagnetic fields. Immediately, all of Clay's equipment shuts down. Faraday suddenly realizes something is wrong. Newton planned to obtain energy from tritium, but its decay period is too short. It seems Newton was creating nonsense. Faraday simply won't have time to save the planet. While pondering this, an elderly lady suddenly addresses him, confessing she worked with Newton. Her name is Watt, and she is ready to help Faraday. Meanwhile, Justin brings her family to London and arrives at the laboratory to organize things. Josiah suddenly starts noticing changes in himself. He foresees an accident and pulls his granddaughter Molly off the road in time. In the evening, Faraday admits he is getting nowhere. He finds more and more differences between Antea and Earth. Here, people rarely follow instructions. He leaves the house, remembering his planet and flight, and again encounters Watt. She leads him somewhere, confessing she knows he is a drone. Josiah gives his daughter the materials he saved from her work. Watt tells Faraday that Earth and Antea once collided in space, after which Earth absorbed part of Antea, but Antea also received a piece of Earth, awakening the human within some Anteans. The pair heads to the laboratory, where Watt reminds him of Newton's words about the virus, humans, which drone Faraday did not hear. Therefore, his children are dying now. Angered, Faraday pushes the woman away, and she starts destroying everything around. Elizabeth, watching all of this, is puzzled, as Faraday is absolutely alone in this laboratory. Then, the alien realizes the woman is just his imagination, suggesting what to do next. He goes to Justin because he has deciphered the project. Justin shows him her equation, where she replaced tritium with another substance. Friends, the continuation of the story is now before you on the screen. The next day, Faraday records a message to his wife. He explains that on Earth they would be called a family, and their children would be real children and not dolls. It seems as though he's beginning to understand what emotions are. Drones on Antea have no right to choose, but on Earth the range of choices is astounding. There can be dozens of varieties of just coffee. Even children can choose. Humans create rituals out of simple actions. For example, the ritual of family dining or talking to God. And during meals, people share their day's events. They also experience a sense of joy which Faraday wishes to experience with his wife. Each generation here produces a handful of great minds. Justin is one of them. The number of emotions experienced by people in a day is absurd. And everyone around Faraday lives in fear of some kind. The fear of failure leads Clay to meet with Finch. After a tough conversation, he still pleads for another week, as Faraday was almost done building the device. Faraday then continues to explain that on Earth, everyone has their own self, but on Antea, they are born either as knowers or drones, but here everyone creates themselves. And people also believe in something higher, that is, in God. One day, Josiah suddenly cuts off a conversation about synthesis and leaves the table, and this marks the beginning of his changes. Then a man plays a jazz record explaining what it is and how it originated. While improvisation was inexplicable, Faraday tries to explain it to his wife. Meanwhile, Elizabeth tells Clay that the signal in the tornado came from somewhere in Southeast Asia. Also, the stewardess on the plane, Faraday, was posted about it afterwards. After seeing Clay off, Elizabeth calls someone on the phone and asks for a meeting. At this time, Eddie informs his brother about the desire of oil magnate Thorne to buy half of the Origin Corporation. In London, Josiah notices a music store. He then picks up a guitar and starts playing, astonishing the salesman, but suddenly the man faints. Justin finds him in the hospital, and although doctors were sure everything was fine, Faraday tells how Josiah was born in the Bahamas and turned his genius to music in his youth. But his wife left him after their daughter was born, and the alien confesses that she shared his DNA with the old man, which is now rewriting Josiah's human genome, and what he will turn into is unknown. Josiah then leaves the house and goes to a bridge. There he finds a wasp nest and stares at it for a long time, and upon returning home, starts writing an endless equation. The doctor arrives and announces that his blood oxygen level is elevated. Justin blames everything on Faraday, but suddenly, Faraday realizes that Josiah translated his daughter's equation into sound frequencies and wrote a song, the key to the synthesis process. He sets up a keyboard instrument in front of the device and asks Josiah to play its melody. Well, the man begins to play, and gradually, by changing frequencies and tempo, he manages to activate the device. Faraday joins him, and everything works out. That night, Elizabeth takes Josiah's medical chart from the doctor and reports of Clay about Faraday's successful experiment. Looking at the test results, she figures out that Newton is in Cambodia, where a cement bunker can be seen in the middle of the jungle. Clay informs Finch about this, and she forbids him to go there. But the agent sends a special force team to Cambodia. The soldiers enter the building, which turns out to be empty, but inside they find unknown plants whose dust kills them. Clay watches this in horror through a mirror screen. Meanwhile, Molly asks her family to help her with an assignment and create a family tree. But they have no photos, so Faraday draws a very similar family portrait, to which Molly asks to add him. At this time, Hutch and Eddie attend the presentation of the new oncology center of the Magni, born because Eddie is obsessed with the idea of using it to protect against the CIA. Clay's people try to understand what happened in the bunker of Cambodia, and Elizabeth finds power lines laid out of the bunker, but can't yet track exactly where. Josiah notices that the fingerprints are disappearing from his fingers, and he hears synapses forming in his brain, and realizes that he's becoming an Anthean. At Eddie's estates, a meeting begins attended by Clay. Justin realizes that he is not a scientist at all and starts suspecting that something is not right. She doesn't want Faraday to fall into the hands of those who tore Newton apart. And later, Finch reprimands Clay for the soldiers' deaths and orders him to fly to Washington. Realizing that their work could be blocked by the CIA, Justin leaves, and Faraday activates the system, calling Newton to start asking questions. He doesn't understand why the launch was delayed, as it's fatal for Antea. Newton, impressed with his rebirth, advises learning to lie. To outsmart the CIA, he must make himself a legend, as Fame could not be killed. Newton disconnects, and Elizabeth, rushing into the laboratory, fails to see anything. Thinking it over, Faraday suggests making their work public, as the CIA loves silence. Hutch arranges a meeting with a journalist friend, and Faraday talks about a new energy source and the CIA's threat to freeze the project. Eddie learns that a man named Clay emerged from a witness protection program. Clay at the moment tries to explain himself to a committee and shows an order signed by Finch and talks about the tape of Newton's interrogation. The woman is shocked, as she did not expect much treachery from her protege. Clay gets a permission to continue the case. Elizabeth shows Justin camera footage from Cambodia, but Newton was not there, even though the bunker was sending a signal into space. Apparently, the alien was talking to his people and warns that Clay will never allow the machine to be taken unless they catch Newton. Justin tells Faraday about the soldiers' deaths, but he doesn't believe that Newton could have killed people. That night, Clay comes to Eddie and tells her that he and his mother came to America from Russia, but the woman turned out to be a terrorist. She blew up the building where she worked, abandoning her son to fate. That's when Finch found and adopted him, and he doesn't know where his real mom is now. and he destroyed his foster mother today, and meanwhile, Faraday also finds the Cambodian recordings and hears Newton's signal to Antea. He admits to Justin that Newton deceived everyone, and he never intended to return home because he wanted to bring the Antheans here. But he, Faraday, promises to do everything to save Earth. Newton transmits the signals intercepted by the CIA, but they cannot decrypt them. Justin is sure that the machine will still be taken, so she asks her friend to take Molly away. They then rush to the laboratory, and Elizabeth immediately reports this to Clay. Faraday dismantles the machine, gives the core to Justin, orders her and Josiah to leave, and stays in the laboratory. The pair barely manage to avoid Clay and his henchmen, and agents burst into the laboratory where they are met by Faraday. But after driving away, Justin decides to return for the alien, and in the laboratory, Faraday, seeing the agents, detonates a gas cylinder. Later, a stunned Clay sees Josiah carrying Faraday away, but is unable to stop it. Faraday regains consciousness and names Mary's phone number. Justin calls her and drives to the monastery. The sister immediately orders the preparation of the operating room and instructs to hide the device. It turns out that Faraday lost a lot of blood, but first the bullet must be removed. When Mary cuts the skin, strange tentacles jump out of the alien's body, frightening the sisters. But Mary assures them that he is an angel. Hutch receives an offer to sell his part of Origin for a large sum. Although he doesn't understand why Magnate Thorne would want a blown-up laboratory, he agrees. In the monastery, Mary sets up women on lookout posts, and Josiah announces that he's ready to give his blood to Faraday, convincing the sisters that he's a Nephilim, half angel, half human. Clay's people search Justin's house, and Elizabeth finds a clue but reports it to her mysterious contacts. At the time in the monastery, Mary confesses to Justin that she got Newton addicted to alcohol, thus ruining his life. Therefore, she asks Justin to do everything to save Faraday as she loves him, although she doesn't yet realize it. In the meantime, Clay's assistant traces a call from Justin and the agents and learns their location. Mary begins a blood transfusion operation from Josiah to Faraday. Clay's agents rush to the monastery, while Elizabeth warns someone that the alien has been found. Meanwhile, to buy time to complete the operation, the sisters and Mary arm themselves and fend off against the agents. A shootout begins, and Clay demands the surrender of the alien, but the sisters stand their ground. However, they run out of bullets, and Mary orders everyone to run while she kneels at the altar. There, Clay finds her, and the woman asks him to say his real name, and he admits that he is Ivan. But the nun corrects him, as his real name is Judas, and the agent shoots her. Hearing the shot, Justin goes into the room and encounters Clay. He orders Faraday, Justin, and the device to be taken, leaving the old man behind. Mary regains consciousness and crawls to the operating room with her last strength. She reaches Josiah's hand and dies happily. Justin's friend and Molly fall into the hands of unknown people. At the same time, Elizabeth warns Clay that they don't have the algorithm to activate the core, and he reports that he has interrogation experience. The alien and Justin are brought to a demolished laboratory and tied to chairs. Seeing Justin being beaten, Faraday confesses that the recorded signal from the tornado is an order for the remaining Anteans to prepare for flight to Earth. Clay takes Justin to another room and orders Elizabeth to guard while he deals with Faraday. The agents start torturing and demanding to confess when and how the aliens will arrive. Elizabeth asks Justin for the algorithm, but Justin remembers how the girl betrayed her family. She allowed Clay to kill in the monastery, so how is she any better than him? Clay continues the torture, but it had no effect on the alien. And instead, Faraday manages to enrage Clay, claiming that it was Finch who used him and not the other way around. The agent orders water torture, but it turns out to be a gift for Faraday as he loves the water. Then Elizabeth remembers about the X-ray, and it truly causes Faraday pain, and he starts screaming, which Justin hears. Suddenly, Watt appears before Faraday and advises him to make something up for Clay. Elizabeth notices this and realizes that the alien is losing his mind. Watt, meanwhile, suggests to Faraday that Clay had two families. The alien starts seeing that one family abandoned the boy and the other he betrayed himself. This turns out to be the boy's eternal pain, and Clay gets angry and shoots Faraday in the leg. Visions of Antea, his family, and the flight flash before the alien, and he gives Clay a vision about the imminent arrival of a ship prepared by Newton. The synthesis machine is the ship's engine, but without Faraday it won't work, and the alien offers Clay to play Russian roulette. And this is because he can entrust synthesis only to someone who won't hesitate to sacrifice themselves for progress. Faraday tells Clay about his biological mother's dossier, which he found on the internet. He'll say where she is if Clay loads a bullet, spins the chamber, and pulls the trigger. The agent will have a chance to ask 5 questions, and if he survives, Faraday will give him the synthesis. The agent agrees to the terms, and they start the game of Russian roulette. Clay asks about the world of Antea. Faraday tells, and the agent pulls the trigger, and he survives. Finally, they get to the main question for Clay about his mother, and the alien confesses that everything with his biological mother was planned and executed by Finch. She was part of a team working on Newton, and she deliberately deprived the boy of his family and took away his name. Clay, driven mad, points the gun at Faraday, but Elizabeth, who enters, shoots first, killing the agent, and she contacts someone and reports that she has Faraday and Justin, and soon people from oil magnate Thorne arrive at the bunker. Molly has been with them for a long time and is safe, and Josiah is also alive, but his illness has returned. All of them are now under Thorne's protection as he sees the future in synthesis. The people are taken to meet the magnate, and in a vine-covered cave where Buddhist monks sit on the floor, they meet Newton. Faraday recalls how on Antea the knowers took seeds from him that was supposed to sprout on Earth. In the present, Faraday expresses outrage over his dissection, but Newton draws attention to the surrounding vegetation. He had given the monks Antea seeds in exchange for shelter and permission to observe their prayers. This area is a complete magnetic anomaly, which is why satellites see nothing and the CIA cannot find him. Therefore, no one could spot the huge spaceship that Newton built. He shows the ship to Faraday, who realizes that only the knowers should come to Earth. Faraday is shocked because it was the knowers who made all the decisions that led to Antea's demise, and the drones just followed their orders. But now it's the knowers who must perish. Justin also realizes that after the arrival of the knowers, humans will become drones, and after all, the reborn Josiah stopped experiencing emotions and began to prioritize efficiency over love. Newton insists that only the merging of races will give Earth a chance to survive, but Justin is adamantly against it. She refuses to unlock the device algorithm, which she altered before fleeing the laboratory. She leaves and Newton forces his student to learn the algorithm, as he's destined to be the one who will greet the aliens on Earth and prevent their killing. This is because he will become a legend after becoming the head of the Origin Corporation. Faraday demands to take his family on the ship, but Newton advises forgetting about them and staying Justin. He doesn't want to see drones on Earth. Faraday was wrongly classified as a servant because he always asks questions. Faraday finds Justin, who's disappointed in him, and demands to be taken home, but he couldn't do that until he learns the algorithm. He confesses that it was she and her family who taught him to love. Justin gives in and goes home, and they again live in their old house. Josiah's illness has returned, and the woman is disappointed, but her father reminds her of faith, which will help them endure everything. 3 months later, Elizabeth visits Justin, and the woman confesses that she betrayed them for money. But now the CIA will take revenge on her and sooner or later kill her. But before that, they will take Faraday, and Elizabeth gives her cross to Justin, and asks her for forgiveness, and Justin reveals to her Thorne's identity. Later, she accidentally finds Faraday's device, which alerts her to an approaching tornado. Justin follows its directions and enters the hurricane's eye. Meanwhile, news reports broadcast a man ready to share a new type of energy with the world. In the evening, in a huge theater, Faraday appears on stage and he begins to talk about everything that happened. Simultaneously, agents head to Justin and Hutch's home. At the theater, a sniper targets Faraday, but he pulls out the synthesis box, forcing the sniper to stop. Faraday is brought to Finch and he refuses to answer until he sees Justin and Hutch. Although Finch is sure that she is one, the couple is brought in. Then Faraday reminds them that the controlling stake in the new enterprise now belongs to Justin and Hutch, and without their consent, no one can do anything with the device. Faraday will fly to Antea and bring back the remaining people of his planet to Earth. Finch threatens all three with imprisonment, and in response, Faraday announces that in 12 hours, the blueprints for quantum synthesis will appear on the internet, and people will get it for free, and the USA will no longer be the world's owner. Finch threatens Justin's family, but Justin reminds her that against the system is the entire population of Earth, and now the CIA will have to worry about their safety. Later, Faraday comes to Newton, who admits that he's proud of him. Later, Faraday visits Josiah to return his hat and thank him for showing him his paternal love. He says goodbye to Molly, teaching her Antean gestures, and she gives him a logo figurine. The hardest moment for him arrives saying goodbye to Justin, and he will bring his family there, although they might not recognize him now. But the woman is sure that everything will be as it should be. Faraday prepares for departure, while Molly and Justin planned Anthea's siege near their house. And at night, they watch the launch from a distant star. At times very naive, at times deep and subtle, with philosophy, with reflections on family values, but overall, lovers of science fiction should really enjoy it. Los Angeles, October 6th. For Mark Benford, the day begins as usual. After kissing his wife and young daughter Charlie goodbye, the FBI agent prepares for work and meets Nicole, the young nanny who looks after the girl. Olivia is also getting ready for her shift at the nearby clinic, but before leaving, she dials the number of her assistant, Bryce. However, at that moment, he arrives at the pier, intending to take his own life. At work, Mark and his partner Dimitri begin surveillance of a suspect. When the woman is joined by accomplices, the agents start a pursuit. The suspects notice the surveillance, leading to a high-speed chase. At the pier, Bryce prepares to pull the trigger, while the entire city remains unaware of what is about to happen. Mark takes a sharp turn, and something strange happens. His entire life flashes before his eyes. In this vision, the agent sees a board with clues and connections, and then he hides from bandits who have come after him. Coming to his senses, Mark realizes that he wasn't the only one who blacked out. Chaos ensues around him. Hundreds of cars have collided, and people are frantically trying to find help. The agents spot the suspect's car and head towards it. Only the woman remains alive, but she babbles something nonsensical about frightened horses. Mark leaves Dimitri by the car and rushes to his wife to check on her. As he runs through the streets, he realizes the situation is much more serious. The blackout affected the entire city and caused widespread destruction. Olivia informs her husband that hundreds of injured people are being brought to the hospital. She ends the call and attends to a patient, a boy involved in an accident. Amazingly, the teenager recognizes Olivia and calls her by name. At the bureau, the staff is urgently gathered, and Stan Wadek reports the first piece of information. People around the world lost consciousness. It is evident that millions of people died because of the blackout, but Mark is concerned about something else. He admits that he didn't just lose consciousness. During that time, it felt as though he was transported 6 months into the future, to April 29th, and he clearly saw what would happen to him on that day. His colleagues support him, and everyone shares their visions. Only Dimitri remains silent. During the blackout, he saw nothing. Mark and Dimitri organize a board to collect clues, and Benford recognizes it as the one from his vision. He mentions a name that stuck with him, D. Gibbons. According to him, this name is where the investigation should begin. Olivia hesitates, but eventually decides to tell her husband about her vision. She saw herself happy, but with another man. Mark convinces himself that it might just be an illusion, but his vision starts to come true that same evening. Charlie gives her father a bracelet that he saw on his wrist. Olivia has to take Charlie to the clinic so she won't be left alone, while she revives her daughter's favorite toy, Lloyd, the father of the injured boy. Dylan enters the room. The doctor is horrified to recognize Lloyd as the man from her vision, but he doesn't recognize her. In his memory, he didn't see his companion's face because he was always turned away. Meanwhile, the agents return to work, and unexpectedly, Dee Gibbons herself comes to the bureau. It turns out she is a religious woman who brings the agents cupcakes and doesn't understand what role she is supposed to play in the global blackout. The agents check Dee Gibbons and find out that on the day of the catastrophe, someone else with the same name used her credit card. Without delay, the agents fly to Utah, where they are met by Sheriff Keeban. During the conversation, the young woman mentions that she, like Dimitri, saw nothing during the blackout, and the guy hopes that it was just a peculiarity of some people. While the agents try to find Dee Gibbons, the Bureau studies a strange video. A man who remained conscious was spotted at a baseball stadium. Mark notices an abandoned doll factory, and recalling an image from his vision suggests checking the building. The agents immediately realize that someone is inside the factory, but they fail to remain unnoticed. An alarm goes off, and hundreds of dolls begin to sing. Mark and Dimitri find the suspect, but they don't see his face. The psychopath utters a strange phrase and throws a lit lighter. Sheriff Keeban dies from shrapnel injuries. Dimitri understands that his fear is not unfounded. He didn't see his future because that day will not come for him. Checking Dee Gibbons' phone yields results. The unknown person called an unidentified guy from the stadium. Hawk tells Dimitri about her vision. The girl saw herself pregnant in an ultrasound room. Following her colleague's advice, she decides to post her vision on the website that the FBI created to collect memories. Noah decides to follow suit. He also posts his information on the Mosaic website, stating that he saw nothing. The guy's inquiry is answered that same evening. An unknown woman calls from a hidden number and says she saw an intelligence report. According to it, the agent will die on March 15th. A maximum security prison in Germany. One of the inmates, Rudolf Geyer, strolls through the yard chatting with a guard about the blackout. That same day, Mark receives a message from the old man. He knows what caused the blackout, but will only tell Agent Benford in person. Dimitri meets Zoe, his fiancée. The girl happily tells him that in her vision she saw their wedding in Hawaii, and the agent begins to hope that he can change his fate. Mark gets permission for a trip to Munich. He meets with the old man, but Geyer promises to reveal the truth only if he is deported to the US and all charges against him are dropped. Dimitri meets the customs officer from Geyer's vision, and he confirms the old man's memories. The old prisoner gets his way. He receives a pardon, but when it comes to his testimony, it turns out that he only knows about the dead crows and that it is somehow connected to the scriptures. Benford hopes that the old man's words will be of some use. He asks Hawk to check all cases of mass bird deaths. The agents manage to find out that a similar incident was recorded in Somalia many years ago. Mark asks to be sent to Somalia, but after the failure in Germany, the agent's request is denied. Then Benford asks Al to contact a former suspect in a hacking case to help him obtain the necessary information. Meanwhile, Dimitri returns to interrogate the girl they were tailing on the day of the blackout. The guy is sure she knows what happened, but she insists that the agents are looking in the wrong place and that Dimitri should hurry, as he has little time left. Despite Olivia's request to transfer Dylan, he is kept in the ward, but she doesn't even suspect that the boy's father, Lloyd, poses a threat not only to her family. Answering a phone call, Lloyd talks to his accomplice, the one who, together with him, caused the worldwide blackout. The agents are attacked. This prompts the CIA to get involved, and all agents are sent for a polygraph test to determine why someone is now trying to eliminate them. After the interrogation, the government convenes a meeting to decide whether to continue funding the Mosaic project. Stan understands that this is the only way to gather enough information, and they must defend their case. The Senate hearings begin at 10:30 p.m., and the floor is given to Agent Benford. Mark starts to falter in his testimony because he hesitates to tell the truth. In his vision, he was drunk. While Mark struggles, his colleagues find something interesting. In satellite images, they find strange towers in Somalia. Hawk immediately informs Mark of the discovery. After a private conversation with the president, Stan finds his subordinates and tells Mark that they have secured funding. Mark calls Janice to share the good news and to warn her that they will soon return from Washington, but at that moment, the agents are attacked for the second time. In the dining car, a passenger notices an attractive fellow traveler, and to get her attention, he starts talking about the blackout. While he tries to charm the beauty, hoping to lure her to his compartment, Janice Hawk is brought to the hospital in critical condition. Learning about the attack, Olivia tries to call her husband, but soon, he personally appears at the hospital with his colleagues. The agents visit the deceased attackers. Examining the bodies, Dimitri finds a mark on one of them, a blue hand. Mark saw the exact same symbol in his memories, and it was somehow connected to the worldwide blackout. Dr. Simon Campos, the charming guy from the train, gets what he wants, and the girl ends up in his bed, but soon she begins to regret it. The stranger tells her that in his vision, he takes someone's life and enjoys it. Lloyd arranges a party for his son and brings him a Halloween costume. But as soon as the man gets distracted, Dylan leaves. The boy gets on the first bus he finds and makes his way to the right address. Dylan enters the Benford house uninvited, calling it his home. Dimitri finds another blue hand, but this time on a road sign. Following the direction indicated, he sees another marker and continues on. The nanny calls Mark and tells him about the little guest. The man is shocked to learn that Charlie knows the boy well, even though she has never met him before. Lloyd arrives at the house and immediately recognizes it as the one from his vision. Mark also instantly understands who this man is, and when Olivia enters the room, everyone feels awkward. The agents arrive at an abandoned house, which is also marked with the blue hand. Breaking in, they find several bodies with their hands smeared in blue paint. Returning his son to the hospital, Lloyd decides to head home for some rest, but in the backseat of his car, an old acquaintance is waiting. Dr. Simon Campos, the pathologist, informs the agents that all the deceased found in the abandoned house had taken their own lives. Agent Fiona Banks arrives from London at the bureau. Her American colleagues brief her on the Blue Hand ghost community. It consists of those who did not see their future, including all the deceased discovered in the abandoned house. Dressed as ordinary guys, the agents head to the ghost club. But to enter, the guests must play Russian roulette. The agents watch in horror, but when the leader of the movement takes the stage, they reveal themselves and arrest him. During interrogation, Dimitri tries to find out who hired the Blue Hand members that attacked Hawk, but Sunderland refuses to answer any questions, fully aware of what lies ahead. In his vision, Agent Goff heard himself talking to a lawyer. Al confessed to the attorney that he was guilty of the death of a woman named Celia. Tormented by these memories, Goff leaves Dimitri a letter and heads to the roof. To change his fate and avoid being responsible for someone's death, he makes a fateful decision. In his final letter, Al gives hope to everyone who saw something terrible in their visions. He assures people that the future can be changed. Simon finds Lloyd at the hospital, and Lloyd tells his accomplice that he wants to make an official statement and reveal the truth to the world, that they were responsible for the global blackout. Meanwhile, Mark takes his wife to the coast for a romantic weekend, but their relaxation is interrupted by a phone call. Benford is informed that a criminal with star tattoos on his hand has been found, the one Mark saw in his vision. Simon proposes a poker game to his accomplice. If he wins, the secret remains a secret, and no one will know about the blackout. If Lloyd wins, the scientists will make an official statement. Simon is confident that luck will be on his side. Hawk is protecting a witness to a crime involving the criminal with the tattoo. At night, Janice requests help from Dimitri and Benford, and Mark recognizes the person from his vision. Not wanting to take any chances, Mark shoots, once again altering fate and killing the suspect. Lloyd bluffs and wins the game. He refuses the money and asks his accomplice to prepare for the announcement. Janice receives an enhanced image of the first suspect and now manages to see the ring on his hand. This could be the first significant lead. Benford tells his wife that he was able to change everything and eliminate the man with the star tattoos on his hand. But at the same time, somewhere, a new plan is being put into motion, involving another individual with the same tattoo. He delivers a suitcase with rings to an unknown old man. Experts manage to identify the alpha symbol on the ring that belonged to the original suspect. However, no one can yet determine its exact meaning. New information emerges. The NSA discovered that several months ago, a suspicious call was made to Dimitri's phone. Dimitri realizes which call is being referred to and demands that he be given the caller's information, the only way he can prevent his own death. Mark finds a message on his wife's phone about his vision. He tries to figure out which of his friends could have betrayed him, but both Aaron and Stan are outraged by Mark's suspicions and deny any involvement. The agents listen to a recording of the call Dimitri received. They managed to determine that the anonymous woman was in Hong Kong. Despite the boss's orders, Mark informs Dimitri that they are flying to Hong Kong. The agents arrive in Hong Kong, where a local colleague is already waiting for them. Stan is furious that his subordinates disobeyed his orders, but Mark risks his job to save his friend. Lloyd addresses the nation with an official statement. He admits that on the day of the catastrophe, they were conducting secret experiments and takes full responsibility. But listening to the scientist's speech, Mark suspects that the real cause may be hidden elsewhere. Stan demands that the scientist be brought to him for questioning. Hawk remembers that Lloyd's son is still in the hospital, and the boss sends her to speak with him. An unexpected event occurs. Simon Campos himself walks into Stan's office. The scientist insists that he disagrees with his colleague and believes that someone else caused the blackout. He agrees to help with the investigation if the agents grant him access to classified information. Hawk meets Lloyd at the hospital and offers him protection in exchange for information, but Lloyd refuses to cooperate and asks to be left alone. The agents try to locate the woman who called Dimitri. To do so, Mark has to break another rule. He threatens the cafe owner who attempted to withhold the necessary information. Stan shows Simon satellite images that revealed strange towers. The scientist admits that the towers are his invention, a laser designed to accelerate plasma formation. Simon can't understand how this is possible. The technology to create them is still in development. But even more surprising is this: he invented the laser in 1992, but the images were taken in 1991. The agents inform Simon about D. Gibbons, who probably created these lasers. The scientist promises to help find the person who stole his idea. Lloyd asks the chief physician to transfer Dylan to a safer clinic, but after the announcement, the scientist loses his credibility and the doctor refuses to help him. Then Olivia intervenes. She promises to do everything she can to ensure the boy's safety. Mark and Dimitri find the cafe where the woman who called is having lunch. She allows the agents to sit down, but admits that she regrets making the call, and that their visit might only make things worse. The woman claims that the shooter who will take Dimitri's life will be Benford. As proof, the stranger provides Mark's gun's serial number. Shocked by what he hears, Mark loses his temper and creates a scene. He takes the woman hostage and exits the restaurant. A local FBI agent arrives, and Mark is forced to back down. While Mark is in serious trouble in Hong Kong, Olivia is bonding with Lloyd. The scientist tells her about parallel universes in which they might have been together once. The agents are sent back to the States, and Mark is stripped of his badge. Meanwhile, D. Gibbons visits the Sears home. Dylan is being prepared for transfer. Lloyd and Olivia bid a warm farewell, but the doctor notices something amiss. The paramedics turn out to be imposters. They open fire on the security detail and, abandoning Dylan, take Lloyd away. Lloyd regains consciousness in a basement, handcuffed. Hawk is tasked with hiding Simon in a safe place where he can continue his work, but those who need him find the agents as soon as they settle into the safe apartment. Dimitri finds Janice unconscious. Meanwhile, Simon is taken to the basement to meet an old friend. The scientists try to understand who and why they were kidnapped, but the answer comes unexpectedly. The same old man who recently received the suitcase with rings arrives in the basement. The kidnapper introduces himself as Flosso. He makes it clear that he won't be gentle, and the hostages should answer his questions precisely. Mark is assigned sessions with a psychotherapist, who helps him recall details from his memories that were previously hidden. Benford remembers that on that night he was talking to Lloyd on the phone. Later, Mark reveals another memory to Aaron. In his conversation with Lloyd, he mentioned a second blackout. Lloyd remains silent, realizing that his revelations could lead to a catastrophe, but Flosso finds a way to make the scientist talk. He has Simon's finger cut off right before Lloyd's eyes. The agents discover where the captive scientists are being held. On the way to the basement, Dimitri calls Janice and asks her to join the operation. Unable to resist any longer, Lloyd tells everything that happened during the experiment, giving Flosso specific details. At that moment, the agents storm the location, but it turns out to be empty. The only thing awaiting the agents is a booby trap. Driving around the city, Mark recalls the map from his visions and realizes where to search for the captives. By this time, Lloyd and Simon are being prepared for execution. The agent crashes into an abandoned store and rescues the scientists. Simon is loaded into an ambulance, but inside, he is met by Flosso. The old man apologizes for the finger and explains that it was to divert suspicion from the boy and to ensure Simon has no desire to rebel. He reminds him that Simon was the initial suspect. Several months earlier, after his father's funeral, unknown individuals took the scientist to a baseball game and ordered him to wear the ring. Thanks to it, he remained conscious while everyone else blacked out. The operation was led by D. Gibbons. Janice informs Simon that he will be held in custody for some time. The young man stages a spectacle and manages to escape, but not for long. When he arrives in Canada, Hawk is already waiting for him with armed soldiers. Hawk agrees to stay in Canada so that Simon can visit his family. But once again, Simon outsmarts the agent and escapes, despite wearing a special bracelet. Simon heads to a boat owned by an old friend, confident that no one will find him there. However, Hawk beats him to the boat, arriving even before he does. The pair returns to Simon's house, pretending that nothing has happened. The family prepares for dinner, and their Uncle Teddy arrives. Simon opens the door for his relative and is greeted by Flosso. During dinner, a call comes in, and Simon's mother says it's Annabelle, his sister, who left home after the blackout. Flosso prevents Simon from answering the phone and shows him a video. His sister is being held hostage to ensure that Simon doesn't try to escape again. To further demonstrate the seriousness of his intentions, Flosso shows Simon a body in his trunk, the old man from the boat. Fed up with the blackmail, Simon decides to break free. He attacks Flosso and stops his heart. Mark brings Lloyd to his house and asks him to recall everything from his vision. Both men feel uneasy, but the agent knows that this is crucial for his investigation. Dimitri is confident that the Hong Kong woman's prophecy won't come true because he turned in Mark's gun for destruction. But attempts to change the future fail. The gun goes missing. The agents fly to Somalia to inspect the strange structures in person. Simon is part of the expedition, but he is denied a weapon. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Mark informs his boss that he has discovered D. Gibbons' real name, Dyson Frost, and that somehow he will be connected to Charlie. The team of agents comes under fire. Their guide tries to explain that they are on a humanitarian mission, but this doesn't stop the Somalis who kill the translator. The Somali leader realizes that he's being lied to. He has already seen foreigners arrive and set up the towers many years ago. He locks the visitors up and promises to kill them, one by one. The agents manage to disable the guards and take their weapons. They reach the helicopter, but it's already being looted by locals, forcing the agents to come up with a new plan. The team attacks their opponents but doesn't have time to escape. They are once again confronted by the leader. This time, everyone understands that there will be no chance to fight back. One of the guards, out of fear, reveals the truth about the visitors. Learning that they are FBI agents, the Somali demands a large ransom to help him take over the country. Janice manages to persuade the leader. She convinces him that their mission is not to start a war, but to prevent one. The Somali helps the group reach one of the towers. Simon examines the structure with surprise, noting that it was built exactly according to his design, but long before he developed it. Dimitri discovers a videotape that has been stored in the tower for 18 years. On the tape, the Somali recognizes his fellow tribesmen, whom he believed died during the first blackout. The agents also identify the experiment's author. It was D. Gibbons. Exploring the tower's tunnels, the agents find a sealed room where villagers were imprisoned. Judging by the remains, the experiment's participants were killed. The Somali leader is enraged by what he sees and plans to take revenge on the Americans, but Vogel acts faster, leaving the Somali leader lying with his tribesmen. Dimitri reviews the tape again, and the next few seconds shock him. D. Gibbons from 1991 addresses him by name. The recording is sent to the department. Mark watches the message left by Gibbons many years ago. Following the criminal's clues, Benford deciphers the chess code and dials the phone number that Gibbons left specifically for the agents. Mark arrives at a chess club to meet someone who could help in the search for the scientist, but the only witness has been killed. Benford realizes that there is someone in the department leaking information. To find out who the traitor is, Agent Vogel gathers everyone in the conference room, and a special team searches the employees' offices. A bug is found on Mark's desk. Everyone with access to the office falls under suspicion, creating tension among the colleagues. The agents are most suspicious of Janice. Recently, she has taken many days off, which she struggles to explain, but she deflects suspicion by accusing Marcy, a colleague with family problems. Dimitri reviews the camera footage and notices a pattern. Marcy was signaling with a coffee cup. Mark looks up at the girl and she understands everything. A shootout ensues in the office. Marcy kills her colleagues and runs outside. Her accomplice arrives on a motorcycle to help her escape, but Janice manages to prevent the getaway. Benford receives a call from Dyson Frost. He offers the agent a personal meeting and promises to call back. Janice and Simon head to the underground parking garage where the girl suddenly stops. She tells the scientist that his signal has been received. Her boss is ready to talk to him. Simon realizes that Marcy was just a distraction. The real traitor has always been Hawk. The police inform the feds that a crime was committed the previous night using the stolen gun. Dimitri catches up with Marcy to find out to whom she passed the gun, but she only says that preventing Dimitri's death is impossible. The agents receive a signal that a criminal with Mark's gun is committing a crime in the city center. Dimitri steps forward, trying to distract the guy and persuade him to release the hostage. As soon as the assailant lowers his guard, Dimitri shoots. Despite the successful outcome, there is no relief. The gun in the attacker's possession has a different serial number. Agent Dimitri prepares for his wedding, trying not to think about the future. But while the bride and guests wait for him at the church, D. Gibbons attacks him at his home. Mark decides to inform his wife about his missing friend, and while she is on the phone, D. Gibbons sits down next to Charlie. The agents carefully interrogate Charlie, and the girl describes her conversation with the stranger. She also hands over a picture the old man left her. Mark and his colleagues prepare to visit the address that D. Gibbons provided with the picture. Meanwhile, Dimitri finds himself at the mercy of a gun, which the villain has attached to a special device. The mad scientist enthusiastically tells his hostage about his inventions and plans. He claims that Dimitri's death is his only chance to save his own life. Benford arrives at the designated location. Finally, a teenager approaches the agent and hands him a backpack with a phone. The agent follows all of the criminal's instructions without question to save his friend. He leaves his colleagues behind and, getting into the prepared car, successfully evades pursuit. D. Gibbons directs Mark along a highway through the countryside. Constantly checking his watch, the agent continues his journey through the mountains. Finally, he spots D. Gibbons. The old man raises his gun and orders the agent to handcuff himself. Mark distracts the old man and attacks him. He demands that Gibbons take him to Dimitri, but someone no longer wishes to keep the witness alive. The scientist is eliminated. As he dies, he doesn't have time to tell Mark where Dimitri is. The navigator leads Mark to the last known location of D. Gibbons. Benford bursts into the building and spots his friend. There are less than 2 minutes left before the automatic shot, and Mark tries to solve the scientist puzzle to stop the mechanism. The timer reaches 0 and the gun fires, but by this time, Mark manages to lift the gun and Dimitri survives. As soon as Dimitri gets out of the chair, water washes away the scientist's map, destroying all the evidence and clues. Mark instructs his colleagues to figure out Frost's blueprints and determine how they are connected to the second blackout, which the mad scientist mentioned. A strange man appears at Olivia's house. He babbles incoherently, claiming that the doctor's husband is Lloyd. Meanwhile, Janice delivers Frost's blueprints to a professor of archaeology, but the people for whom the double agent secretly works demand that she steal the originals and hand them over. Hawk is forced to take a risk. She steals the blueprints from the institute and sneaks into the office to retrieve the last copy from Mark's desk. Benford catches his colleague red-handed, but she manages to talk her way out by inventing a story about lost documents. Mark asks Hawk to come to the office to meet with the professor. The girl realizes that her deception has been uncovered, but Benford postpones the conversation and returns to his discussion with the scientist. According to the old man, the blueprints that D. Gibbons had were some kind of device for counting down dates. One of them is October 6th, the day of the blackout. Frost's words keep replaying in Mark's mind, and an idea strikes him. He breaks open the large chess piece hanging on the board. Inside, the agent finds a ring with an unknown symbol. Olivia meets Gabriel, the strange man, again. He keeps repeating random, nonsensical words, but finally, the woman manages to discern the main point. The guy has been subjected to multiple blackouts, becoming a victim of Frost's experiments. Experts provide the scientists with the results of analyzing Frost's ring, and Simon makes an astonishing discovery. Inside the ring is a device that allowed its wearer to remain conscious during the blackout. Janice meets with her handlers. After failing the mission with the blueprints, she is given one last chance. This time, she must retrieve the ring from the vault and eliminate Benford. On a city bridge, Simon spots his sister. Annabelle delivers a message to her brother. They need him and the ring. Simon has only 12 hours, or else his sister will be killed. Dimitri arrives at a crime scene and learns that someone has been eliminating all those who managed to survive the predicted date of their death in the last 2 weeks. Simon memorizes the safe's code when Lloyd places the ring inside. As soon as the scientist is left alone, he decides to use this opportunity to save his sister. The agents identify the executioner who has been getting rid of all the survivors. It turns out to be Mr. Slingerland. The agents catch the psycho just as he tries to dispose of another victim, but despite all efforts to save her, an agent accidentally hits the girl. Mark discovers a minivan and Annabelle inside. He informs Simon, but it's already too late. The scientist escapes with the ring. The agents investigate Simon and his alibi for the day of the blackout. Using special software, they establish that he was indeed the prime suspect at the baseball stadium. Olivia brings Gabriel to Mark's office to help find clues. According to the madman, Benford's wall is full of errors, and he forces the agent to redo everything according to his notebook. During interrogation, Gabriel says that Frost wasn't the only leader. There was someone much more important, and he will repeat the blackout very soon. The deranged stranger shows a portrait of this person. It turns out to be the man Simon is currently talking to. Gabriel is set to be transferred to a safe house, and Janice informs her handlers about it. The minivan falls into an ambush, but instead of the strange madman, it's Mark disguised inside. But the agent's operation doesn't end there. He manages to infiltrate the villain's lair and capture the leader. Mark realizes who the traitor in their department is, but Janice still doesn't tell the truth. She claims she was only working for the CIA. Benford begins interrogating the main suspect. He wants to know how the villain caused the global blackout, but the scientist is confident that it doesn't matter. Regardless of how the day unfolds, the outcome will be the same. Benford will be dead by nightfall. Dimitri heads to Janice's house and finds Simon there. Hawk sees no other way out. She helps her partner arrest Simon, despite their previous arrangement. Despite warnings, Mark loses control and uses force to find out when the global blackout is planned. Stan realizes that Benford is not in control of himself and orders him to be removed from the office. At 6 in the evening, thousands of people gather in the streets to celebrate April the 29th, the day from the visions. Lloyd arrives at Olivia's house to ensure events unfold correctly, but the woman also decides to change her fate and leaves town with Charlie. Mark's chain of events also changes. He starts a brawl in a bar and ends up in a jail cell. With just over an hour left until the moment of truth, all the characters find themselves in different places, but Stan posts bail for Mark, and everything starts to fall into place. The agents return to the bureau due to a report of planted explosives. At the same time, Lloyd finds Olivia and asks her to return home so they can recreate the evening from their shared memories. The scientist's plan begins to unfold. Dylan writes the formula he saw Lloyd use on the mirror. The FBI building is attacked by masked assailants, but this doesn't stop Mark, and he finds himself in his place at the map with the clues. Simon infiltrates the corporation's server room to hack the computer and prevent another blackout. At the appointed time, Lloyd calls Mark and gives the date of the next blackout, the next 48 hours. Thanks to Gabriel's notebook, Benford learns the exact time. The blackout will happen in 12 minutes. The masked criminals destroy Mark's office and all his work, but the agent survives and tries to fight back. Simon notices that someone has remotely taken control of the program and he cannot stop it. Dimitri suspects the scientist did it on purpose, but Simon swears he is trying to prevent the catastrophe. Mark manages to warn his boss about the next blackout, but he can't get out of the building and is once again surrounded by armed mercenaries. With 30 seconds left before the explosion, Mark runs for the exit, but at that moment the mechanism activates and the world freezes again, glimpsing into its future. This is where the series ends. And every day, a young fisherman named Syracuse sets out to fish off the coast of Ireland. One day, he finds a young woman in his nets. He helps her, and when she regains consciousness, he is relieved to see that she seems unharmed. However, she behaves quite strangely and refuses to go to the hospital. She also can't remember her name, which Syracuse attributes to amnesia. He takes her to his late mother's house, offers her some sandwiches, and suggests she stay there for a while. He needs to go see his daughter. Annie lives with his ex-wife, Maura, and today he has to take the girl to dialysis. While the procedure is ongoing, he tells Annie a story about a fisherman who caught a woman from the sea. Annie explains that it was likely a selkie, a creature she learned about at school. Sometimes they come ashore until the sea calls them back. After the procedure, Syracuse takes Annie back to her mother, who is eager to show her the new electric wheelchair she received. Annie shows off the chair to her father, but her mother immediately criticizes him for not talking to the doctor about a new kidney for their daughter. The next morning, Syracuse finds a woman washing clothes in a stream, singing in an unknown language. She asks if she can come with him, and he lets her board his boat. On the way, she says her name is Ondine, which means from the water. Soon, Syracuse's boat stops for lobster fishing, but the baskets come up empty. Ondine begins to sing a song that Syracuse has never heard before, and suddenly every basket is filled with a catch. She helps him pull them out and is surprised when he throws the smaller ones and extras back into the sea. However, she flatly refuses to go with him to the market. He sells the lobsters to the astonished buyers and purchases a dress at a store. Then he heads to pick up Annie from school. On the way home, he continues the story about the fisherman and the woman from the sea. She sings to the fish and he catches them. Both are happy. Annie thinks it's a dream because everything seems like his dream coming true. Moreover, no one knows the language she sings in. After dropping his daughter off at home, Syracuse heads back, not noticing that the curious girl is following him. He gives Ondine some clothes and food when he reaches the house and finds her talking to his father, who asks how long she'll be staying in his house. Hearing that it's up to him, Syracuse decides she'll stay forever to live with him happily ever after, like in the fairy tale he's been making up with Annie. After seeing everything with her own eyes, Annie goes to the library and asks for books about selkies. Meanwhile, Syracuse goes to church to confess, admitting he's an alcoholic, even though he hasn't drunk for over 2 years. Lately, he's been haunted by a dream where he attends the funeral of his ex-wife's new husband, Alex, after which he reunites with Maura, who still struggles with alcohol problems. The priest advises him to see a psychologist, but Syracuse reminds him of the secrecy of confession and tells him that he pulled a woman out of the water with his net. Now he's hiding her from everyone else. The priest asks him to come to Mass as there's no other way he can help him. Meanwhile, Annie is studying legends about selkies. Undine cleans the cottage and then examines the new things Syracuse brought her. She's particularly intrigued by the fishnet stockings, which she stretches over one hand, making them look webbed. The next day, Annie goes to her grandmother's cottage and sees Undine swimming. The girl boldly approaches the shore and declares that she knew all along. The story about the fisherman and the selkie isn't a fairy tale. Annie tells her about her illness and asks her to heal her, but Undine doesn't know magic and says so. The girl asks a lot of questions, and Undine likes the lively and straightforward child. Annie asks her to always tell the truth, because what's the point of friendship otherwise? She's very curious about what it's like underwater. Is it better or worse than here? Undine says it varies, but singing is easier there. Annie shares everything she's learned about selkies from the books. They can stay on land for up to 7 years until they find happiness with a human. Then she abruptly shifts the conversation to her grandmother because her father still misses her very much. Remembering her mother, Annie prepares to go home, and Undine asks her to come back again. Syracuse also goes to the library to borrow books about selkies, only to find out that Annie has already taken them. Meanwhile, Annie meets up with the neighborhood kids who show off their bikes, and she lets one of the girls play with her wheelchair before it runs out of power and rolls into the water. The kids abandon Annie, and she has to make her way home where she's met by Alex. He recharges her battery and tells her that selkies were invented in his homeland of Scotland, but the girl insists that Undine speaks a different language. Meanwhile, Syracuse finds Undine on a pontoon in the middle of the bay and offers to take her back to his boat. He asks her to hold the tiller, but when a patrol boat speeds by, Undine hides and steers the boat with her foot. Syracuse teases her, noting that she manages just fine with her feet. She starts singing again as he pulls up his net and discovers it's filled with a bountiful catch of salmon, which his nets usually can't catch. Before he can fully enjoy his luck, Syracuse sees the patrol boat returning. The wildlife officers find the salmon and demand to see the nets he used to catch them. He shows them the usual nets for catching salmon, but they're completely dry, meaning he's telling the truth. However, the men notice Undine hiding in the hold. She confirms that Syracuse caught the salmon in an ordinary net, and they leave the boat. Relieved that the officers believe their story and that nothing happened when Undine was seen by people, they head to the harbor together to sell the catch. Syracuse offers to buy her a gift, and she asks for another dress, which she'll choose herself. On the way to the store, they run into Annie, who's thrilled that their story isn't just a fairy tale. The girl helps Undine pick out an outfit while the townspeople gawk at the pretty stranger through the shop window. Later, Annie arrives at her grandmother's house, which looks festive and cozy thanks to Undine's efforts. Undine offers to teach the girl how to swim, and she agrees since she'll have someone from the sea by her side. They both play in the shallow water when Undine suddenly sees something in the water and asks Annie to get on the raft. She pulls out a bundle, which Annie calls selkie clothing. According to legend, if she buries it in the ground, she'll be able to stay on land for 7 years, provided her sea husband doesn't come for her. After listening to Annie, Undine buries the find in the greenhouse, and Annie counts the steps to remember the exact spot. Later, she tells her father about it and advises him to watch out for strangers. Meanwhile, they all head to the local festival by boat, and Undine denies Annie's claim that she can grant wishes because she's not really a selkie. Upset, Annie pretends that her wheelchair brakes have failed and falls off the pier, hoping to test the truth of her words. Undine jumps in to save her and pulls the girl to the surface. Syracuse carries Annie home and hands her over to Maura and Alex. Later, Undine tells Syracuse that the wheelchair's brakes work just fine and that Annie was testing her ability to breathe underwater. He confesses that he used to drink heavily, but one day he returned from a trip to find Annie's mother sleeping next to their unconscious child. They saved the girl, and he decided that one of them had to stay sober at all times. Meanwhile, Maura tells Annie that a dark-haired stranger has been looking for the fisherman's girlfriend, which causes the girl to have a nightmare. Meanwhile, Syracuse and Undine become intimate. Later, he goes to confession and admits to the priest that he sinned with Undine the night before, and now he fears the luck she brings because he's long lost hope for the best. He knows that something wonderful or terrible will happen, and he's afraid of both. After the conversation, the fisherman steps outside and is approached by an unknown man who starts asking questions about Undine. Syracuse ignores him and walks away. That day, he takes Annie to dialysis as usual, but when they return home, no one is there. Maura and Alex had been out drinking at the nearby pub. Syracuse takes the girl there. Finally reaching home, he finds the doors broken in and Undine nowhere to be found. Syracuse searches the shore and eventually finds her hiding. She reminds him of the Selkie's husband and says he's here to take her away. Meanwhile, the intoxicated Maura is riding her daughter's wheelchair and, despite Alex's warnings, is determined to make it home on it. Syracuse hides Undine in a secret cave behind the waterfall, offering to grant her a wish, but her only wish is for Annie to get well, so he wishes for her to be able to stay. Meanwhile, the man searching for Undine is driving around town and gets into a car accident, colliding with a car driven by the intoxicated Maura. Alex is thrown through the windshield. Annie, however, manages to buckle up, but still sustains injuries. Syracuse and Undine, driving by, recognize the car. Syracuse screams and rushes at the medics as they load Annie onto a stretcher to take her to the hospital. Later, they find the girl in the hospital and learn that she's undergoing an immediate kidney transplant from Alex, who, by a stroke of luck, was a compatible match. Meanwhile, the unknown man meets Undine in the hallway. He wonders why she speaks their language because neither of them belongs here. The sea spat her out, but this is not their world. The woman asks him to return home without her. The next morning, Annie wakes up and immediately asks where Undine is. Syracuse reassures her that they'll see her soon. Sometime later, a cremation ceremony for Alex takes place. Maura scatters his ashes over the sea, regretting that this time she can't blame her ex-husband for everything. She asks him to take Annie, but demands that he get rid of Undine, and she forces her husband to drink to Alex's soul. In a drunken state, Syracuse goes to the boat where Undine is hiding and, calling her a Selkie, takes her out to sea where he demands that she return to her husband and sing her songs to him. He takes her to the foot of the lighthouse and continues to insist that she needs to leave. He leaves her there and prepares to sail away, believing that life isn't a fairy tale. People and Selkies can't be together. Undine asks for a chance to say goodbye to Annie, but he sails away. As dusk falls, the log she's sitting on gives her silhouette the appearance of a woman with a tail. Waiting for nightfall, she jumps into the sea. In the morning, the priest wakes up a depressed Syracuse, who realizes he's made a big mistake. He brings Annie from the hospital to his home. The girl comforts him, saying that Undine will come back because she left something here. Later, Annie watches TV, where the Icelandic band Sigur Rós is performing, and suddenly Syracuse recognizes the words. He realizes that Undine was an ordinary woman and rushes to the lighthouse. At first, he can't find her anywhere and runs along the shore, shouting, but soon he sees a fire where Undine is warming herself. At first, she says she's a sea creature who found her magical clothes and buried them so she could stay forever with the family she loves. But Syracuse demands the truth, and then Undine admits that she was a courier delivering illegal substances from Romania. She was in a boat with a backpack full of substances when the police closed in. Her guard threw her into the water because he couldn't swim. She swam until she couldn't anymore, and then she drowned. But she got caught in Syracuse's net. The girl tells him her real name, Ioana. The fisherman takes her home where criminals are already waiting, having taken Annie hostage. Syracuse tries to fight them off, but he can't handle two armed men. The girl told him the story about the Selkie's clothing buried in the greenhouse, and the men demand to be shown the spot. Everyone heads to the greenhouse to dig up the goods, but they find nothing because Annie has hidden the Selkie's clothing elsewhere. Undine promises to stay with Annie, and she admits that she hid the package in the lobster crate. Everyone heads to the boat, but when the criminals lift the basket, Annie reminds Undine that she's a Selkie, and they are not. Undine throws one of the villains overboard. He drowns while Syracuse throws the other Romanian into the water, disarming him. The arriving police arrest the criminal along with Undine, who faces deportation unless she gains citizenship, or she could get married. Later, Annie goes to confession and says that her father's getting married soon. Even though she wasn't a real Selkie, but you can't marry a seal, can you? In the final scenes, a girl in a white dress and a fisherman in a suit sail off on their boat for a honeymoon, bringing to life the fairy tale about the happiness of a human in a Selkie. That's where the movie ends. The story is set in a world grappling with a unique and terrifying epidemic. This epidemic, which has baffled scientists and experts for over 8 years, is spread through language and speech, making communication dangerous. The main symptom of the disease begins with a high fever, eventually causing the afflicted to speak incoherently, descending into madness. As a precaution, people have resorted to wearing headsets constantly, as the disease can be transmitted by hearing the speech of the infected. Those affected by the illness, known as jabbers, are swiftly quarantined and forcibly separated from their families, leading to public outrage and distress. The story introduces Murat, a linguist whose life has been profoundly altered by the pandemic. Isolated and lonely, he lives with his mother in an apartment, his life reduced to a series of cautious routines. Each day, Murat meticulously checks his temperature, a ritual that underscores the constant fear of infection. One day, Murat's attention is drawn to Sul, a young woman immersed in a book. At a bus stop, time seems to stand still as Murat is captivated by her presence. However, the moment is broken when she notices his prolonged gaze. Realizing he's been staring, Murat awkwardly shouts that no bus is coming and quickly departs, heading back home. The narrative continues as Murat, despite his reluctance, leaves his home to buy soap for his mother. While at the supermarket, he encounters an old woman who suddenly turns around and speaks incoherently, a clear sign of being a jabber. An alarm is triggered, announcing the presence of a jabber and urging people to evacuate immediately. In the ensuing chaos, everyone flees, except for the old woman and a young boy who is left behind without a headset. Murat witnesses the boy's mother crying outside. Driven by a sense of responsibility, Murat bravely re-enters the supermarket, gives his headset to the boy, and makes a narrow escape. Remarkably, Murat manages to avoid contracting the epidemic. Despite his close encounter with the jabber, he experiences a high fever but eventually recovers and returns home unscathed, soap in hand. Meanwhile, Anton, a high-ranking official at AEI, is desperately seeking a solution to the pandemic. He faces a setback upon learning that even young children are susceptible to the disease. However, his interest is piqued when he hears about Murat's incident at the supermarket. Intrigued by the possibility that Murat might be immune, Anton delves into surveillance footage to learn more. He observes Murat collapsing in the supermarket, but later continuing on as if unharmed, which deepens Anton's confusion and curiosity. In another part of the city, Murat visits the home of his mother's friend, responding to a desperate call for help. The friend's son, Arif's father, is exhibiting symptoms of the disease, speaking disconnectedly. Arif, holding on to hope, pleads with Murat to find a cure, believing in Murat's unique abilities. He even suggests collaborating with Murat's friend Ozgur, but Murat informs him that Ozgur has passed away. Arif, skeptical about Ozgur's death due to the lack of a proper funeral and the absence of his body, plans to meet with Errol, a businessman known for trading in information. Arif hopes Errol can shed light on whether Ozgur is indeed alive and assist in their quest for a cure. Meanwhile, Anton takes a deep dive into investigating the mysterious case of the headset left with a child at the supermarket. He discovers that the headset belongs to Murat, a linguist who was working on the pandemic case but vanished after a disastrous fire that claimed the lives of his team. Intrigued, Anton intensifies his investigation. Delving further, Anton uncovers records of Murat visiting the emergency room with severe fever more than 12 times. Using video footage from the supermarket, along with a temperature detector, Anton confirms his suspicions. Murat is immune to the pandemic. He deduces this from the fact that Murat has surpassed the critical threshold of 4 high fever encounters, a significant discovery given Murat's 12 instances. In the meantime, Murat, spurred by Arif's belief in Ozgur's survival, decides to investigate further. He meets a businessman who offers them access to AEI's resources, allowing them to gather information independently and save costs. With newfound determination, Murat boldly infiltrates the AEI headquarters and navigates his way to the information hub downstairs. There, Murat searches for Ozgur's name and is initially disheartened to find records indicating his death. He clicks on the autopsy image, expecting the worst, but is surprised to see an unrecognizable burnt face with no identifiable tattoo on the wrist. This absence of a tattoo, which Murat knows his friend had, rekindles his hope that Ozgur might still be alive. Before leaving the hub room, Murat impulsively searches for his own name in the database. To his shock and dismay, he discovers video footage of himself from the supermarket incident. Realizing the potential danger of this discovery, Murat hastily exits the room, unable to delete the record. His escape is filled with anxiety and urgency, knowing that his presence in the AEI database could have unforeseen and dangerous consequences. Soon after, Anton, fueled by his significant discovery regarding Murat's immunity to the pandemic, eagerly approaches his superior to share his findings. However, his excitement quickly turns to frustration when his superior dismisses his claims, cautioning against spreading unverified rumors. Frustrated by this response and determined to pursue the matter further, Anton decides to take matters into his own hands. He acquires the address of Murat and his mother's home, although under a false name, and sets out with his men to capture Murat. Upon arriving at the destination, they find Murat's mother answering the door, mistakenly assuming it might be her son. However, the AEI forces swiftly invade the home, scattering throughout the house and the apartment complex. They strategically position themselves, lying in wait for Murat's return to spring their trap. Unnoticed by the AEI operatives, Murat's mother subtly places a prearranged signal on the window, a discreet method of communication between her and her son. She then calmly lights a cigarette and sits down, maintaining an air of composure despite the tense situation. Meanwhile, Murat, who had been waiting for another glimpse of the beautiful girl he had seen at the bus stop, returns home. As he approaches his apartment, he notices the signal from his mother. Realizing the imminent danger, he hesitates at the entrance. Inside, Anton and his team are eagerly anticipating Murat's arrival, ready to execute their well-laid plans. In a moment of inner conflict, Murat grapples with the decision to enter the apartment. His thoughts drift to the beautiful girl, and the realization dawns on him that if he walks into the trap, he might never see her again. This thought acts as a turning point, and in his swift decision, Murat chooses to flee in the opposite direction, much to Anton's dismay. His abrupt departure catches Anton and his men off guard, and they lose track of him in mere seconds. Back at Murat's house, Anton seizes the opportunity to collect Murat's belongings for further investigation, hoping to get more insight into Murat's unique situation. The next morning, as Murat sets out on his search for Ozgur, he is stopped by AEI forces demanding to see his ID. In a moment of tension, as Murat nervously reaches for his ID, a bomb suddenly explodes nearby, causing the AEI forces to scatter and leaving Murat unattended. Seizing the moment, Murat heads to a location where he believes he might find Ozgur. However, his hopes are dashed when he discovers Ozgur is not there. Speaking with the man who made Ozgur's distinctive tattoo, Murat learns that since Ozgur's death, others have been imitating the tattoo, diminishing his chances of finding Ozgur. Meanwhile, Anton meticulously reviews tape recordings overnight and stumbles upon a recording of Murat claiming that he is incapable of jabbering, even if he wanted to. This revelation prompts Anton to rush to AEI to share his findings with a colleague. However, upon his arrival, Anton is informed that his boss Fazil is waiting for him. In a confrontational meeting, Fazil sternly instructs him to withdraw from the case. During this time, Murat finds comfort in a conversation with an old man who offers him a drink. As they share this moment, the old man tries to alleviate Murat's guilt over his wife's tragic death, which occurred after she was affected by the pandemic. He reassures Murat that it wasn't his fault. Murat listens in silence, eventually sharing his plans to venture into Zone 6 in his relentless search for Ozgur. Soon, Murat seeks the help of Errol, a man introduced to him by Arif. Errol is known for his willingness to do anything for money, and Murat needs him to create a false ID. They arrange to meet the following day. Afterward, Murat visits Arif's house, where he expresses his determination to find Ozgur and their shared goal of discovering a cure for the epidemic. Before he leaves, Arif's grandmother generously gives him some money, while his mother, having no cash, gives him her necklace as a token of support. However, their movements do not go unnoticed. One of Anton's men spots Murat and promptly informs Anton, who instructs his team to tail him discreetly. The next day, Murat meets Errol, as planned, to collect his forged ID. Just as they complete the transaction, Errol receives an alert that AEI forces are closing in on their location. In a frantic rush, they escape, successfully evading Anton and his team, who later search the warehouse, to no avail. With his new fake ID in hand, Murat heads to the subway station, bound for the less monitored Zone 6. He smoothly passes the initial security checkpoint using the fake ID. However, his sense of safety is short-lived, as a security guard becomes suspicious upon recognizing Murat's face from wanted posters in the subway. In a coincidental twist, Sewell, who Murat has been longing to see again, suddenly appears in front of him. To his astonishment and delight, she kisses him right there in the subway, creating a moment of confusion for the pursuing security guard. This unexpected encounter leaves Murat feeling ecstatic. Holding hands, they continue their journey on the subway, embarking on a path filled with uncertainty, yet united in their unexpected connection. Murat and Sewell, having left the bus stop, navigate through menacing people and areas until they find a secluded rooftop where they can talk privately. On the rooftop, Murat, preoccupied with his quest to find Osgur, is about to leave when Sewell insists he stay for a meal. During their conversation, he learns her name and he expresses gratitude for her assistance earlier. Sewell then reveals her true intentions. She had been following Murat purposefully, hoping to recruit him into her team, P1, which is dedicated to finding a cure for the pandemic. Surprised by this revelation, Murat abruptly leaves, not allowing her to finish explaining. Later, Murat returns to the home he shares with his wife, where he is flooded with memories as he wanders through each room. That night, he dreams of himself torn between his wife and Sewell, symbolizing his internal conflict. The next morning, Murat's search for Osgur takes an unexpected turn when he is kidnapped by masked individuals who question his identity and affiliation with the AEI. At this critical moment, Sewell intervenes, assuring them that Murat is not with the AEI and is on a personal mission. Murat convinces them of his intentions, and they agree to share information if they cross paths with Osgur. Sewell then brings Murat to his studio where she works, and after apologizing for the earlier misunderstanding, she hosts a podcast. In the broadcast, she discusses the AEI's cruel practices, relating them to the unjust death of her boyfriend, and concludes by emphasizing the importance of finding a cure to end the crisis. Meanwhile, Anton retreats to his house, where his wife and son are quarantined in the basement due to the pandemic. While there, Anton senses he is being watched. Upon investigating, he finds no one, unaware that Fazil's right-hand agent is covertly observing him from a hiding spot. Somewhere else, Murat and Sewell's journey through the pandemic-stricken streets of the city continues. While walking downtown, Murat demonstrates his unusual resistance to the pandemic by briefly removing his headset near Jabber's, showcasing how his skull heats up without experiencing the usual symptoms. This unique ability intrigues Sewell, who sees potential in Murat's immunity. That night, Murat stays at the studio with Sewell, and upon waking up the next morning, he finds himself surrounded by the team Sewell had mentioned. The team members introduce themselves and request Murat's assistance. Initially hesitant, Murat warms up to the idea when Sewell assures him that joining the team could aid in his quest to find Osgur. As part of their ongoing search for Osgur, Murat and Sewell come across a hotel displaying the symbol that Murat associates with Osgur. They decide to investigate by entering the hotel and seeking an audience with the hotel's boss. However, their encounter quickly turns dangerous. In a moment of quick thinking, Murat leverages his past experience and knowledge of recording voices to offer the boss a rare tape. This move impresses the boss, diffusing the tension and earning them a chance to sit and talk. As Murat and Sewell are about to explain their quest for Osgur, their conversation is interrupted by a lady entering the room to deliver an item and collect payment. After she leaves, the boss encourages them to continue. Murat and Sewell reveal their search for the person associated with the symbol they possess. To their surprise, the boss informs them that the lady who just left was the one who brought the symbol to the hotel. Reacting quickly, Murat and Sewell rush outside to catch the lady, but they are too late. She drives away, showing no interest in engaging with them. This missed opportunity leaves Murat and Sewell with more questions than answers as they continue their journey in the uncertain and dangerous world. My friends, the continuation of the story is now on the screen in front of you. One day, the ruler of the Murakami province receives a warning from a neighboring feudal lord who has decided to seize a mountain to build a castle there. However, Lord Murakami orders the messenger to be killed and prepares to defend the village. Sometime later, the mountain is besieged by the neighbor's army, confident in victory and mocking the lord, whose face is hidden behind a mask. He sends his soldiers into battle, but the small group led by the lord standing before them extends their hands forward and the entire army falls, destroyed by an unknown weapon that literally pierces their bodies. Present day. At a university, a group of students studying paranormal abilities gathers. One of them, Yoji Minami Maru, nicknamed Nanmaru, possesses a small supernatural power, the ability to create tiny holes in everything, which he demonstrates on a stack of paper. The young people are impressed by his skill, but Nanmaru himself doesn't consider it useful since he can't even find a job. Just then he receives a summons from Professor Murakami and heads to the Department of History and Folklore, where he meets lecturer Emi, who is worried about the professor's absence. Murakami had gone on a research trip and disappeared. The woman is surprised by the boy's last name and asks about his family, but he can't recall anything of interest. Meanwhile, in the town of Marukawa, located on Mount Murakami, a girl named Sachiko wakes up from a nightmare. Her grandmother brings her milk and tries to calm her down. Back at the Paranormal Enthusiasts Club, there's a disagreement, and one of the boys remarks on the uselessness of Nanmaru's ability. The boy gets upset and recalls how his grandfather taught him to punch tiny holes in objects by shouting, believing his grandson was special. At this moment, he is found by student Emi, Tagai. The thing is, Emi, while researching his genealogy, discovered a common ancestor in the boy's family and the professor's. She asked Nanmaru to help search for him, as the last case Murakami studied was the murder of their ancestor. The boy's parents can't help since their family moved away from there a long time ago. In the morning, they show him a model of the village made by Tagai, and Emi tells an ancient legend in which Nanmaru's ancestor betrayed Lord Murakami, leading to his death in battle. However, the professor found a written account that during the battle, all the enemies perished, with only one person on Murakami's side. And 10 days later, a festival took place on this spot, which would be very strange if the residents had betrayed and killed their lord. Tagai draws everyone's attention to the shape of the mountains around the village, as if they were artificially created. But who could have done such a thing back then? Later, Nanmaru demonstrates his ability to his new friends, which greatly impresses them. Meanwhile, in the town of Marukawa, an official notices a strange black circle on a window pane. He reaches out, and his hand seems to be cut off, and then the man's head splits, as if struck by a spherical object. At the university, Emi asks Nanmaru to show his ability and tells him that the professor also learned to punch holes in objects before he disappeared. However, they were much larger. At this point, the boy suggests that the ability might have come from their common ancestor. At that moment, everyone hears the news about the murder of the official in Marukawa. Nanmaru suggests they search for the professor themselves. The action returns to medieval times. Lord Murakami vows not to let anyone invade his lands. His fingers begin to extend, and strange round marks appear on his wrists. Present day. The students, along with Emi, arrive in Marukawa and begin searching for the professor, but no one has seen him. However, the young people find armor with round holes in the local museum, and on the local lord's banner, they notice the image of a magpie, a human hand, and a circle, the meaning of which no one knows. They discover that after Minamimaru's death, his lord gave his youngest son to his family so the lineage would not die out. So Nanmaru is a descendant of the lord himself. They question people on the street, but no one has seen the professor. Soon the students find the building where the murder occurred and for the first time wonder if Nanmaru's ability could punch through window glass. At a cafe, the group learns about the upcoming Tanabata festival. The men sitting at a nearby table suddenly mention that the professor's presence will make the festival unforgettable and lead to the lord's revival. Tagai asks questions, but the men pretend to know nothing about the professor. Then they hear Nanmaru's name and become excited. Later, the friends joke about how the locals consider Nanmaru to be the lord and practically worship him. Emi reminds them that Tanabata is Japan's Day of Lovers, celebrated on July 7th. On this night, the stars Vega in the constellation Lyra and Altair in the constellation Aquila, separated by the Milky Way, come closest, and the magpie lays a bridge between them. But what do these facts reveal? The next day, the group goes to the mountain where the festival will take place and finds 7 strangely shaped stones standing in the middle of a clearing. Later, Sachiko visits Nanmaru, wanting to see the boy's abilities. He punches a can, but it seems that the girl expected something different. In the evening, Emi suggests returning to Tokyo because she doesn't trust the locals. Meanwhile, the hotel owner makes a phone call, reporting that Nanmaru can make holes in objects. The next day, a young man whom Sachiko calls her brother and clearly fears enters her home, but the grandmother asks him to leave and never return. Nanmaru meanwhile goes to the cafe, and the owner reminds him that this village is his real home. The boy asks Sachiko to explain her comment about the man who can achieve, and she arranges to meet him. In the evening, the girl explains that in the town, two types of people with superpowers are born: achievers and window openers. There are only 5 of the former, including Nanmaru, but the latter are those worthy of becoming priests of Mount Murakami. The boy doesn't understand what's so exciting about this since the hole is so small, but the girl abruptly cuts him off. She just wants to live a normal life. After all, she is a window opener. Meanwhile, Sachiko's brother Takashi is walking among people and encounters some local guys. Emi notices a strange glow over the mountain. She and Tagai head there and see a group of people in white robes, dancing with torches in a clearing, summoning someone. Meanwhile, the guys beat Takashi and, pulling off his hat, see a stone embedded in his forehead. They leave him on the road. Emi and Tagai sneak closer to the dancers and see a masked man performing some kind of ritual. After the people leave, the pair approach the stones and realize there are only 6. It means that each day of the festival, 1 stone will disappear. At this moment, Takashi raises his hands and his attackers lose their legs. Another group of people in white arrives at the mountain. Meanwhile, a newspaper article is published about the outrage of local residents protesting the construction of a golf course on the mountain's peak, as this place is sacred to them. At this time, the people in white capture Emi and Tagai, but she shouts the professor's name, and one of the men uncovers his face. It turns out to be the village head, who led the Tanabata ritual passed down through generations in the Murakami family. They apologize and ask her to describe what she saw. Emi recounts the first group that had already been there. Returning to town, she asks the students to leave while she stays to find the professor, as she is sure he is alive. In the morning, Nanmaru says goodbye to Sachiko and exchanges emails with her. Later, Emi sees the students off just as Takashi arrives at the hotel and realizes that the boy has left. Noticing that the hotel owner is making a call, he smashes the phone. He finds out the boy's address in Tokyo and leaves. He later finds Nanmaru at the club and begins teaching him how to use his power. He raises his hands and a sphere grows between his palms, which he calls a sphere beyond reality. It can easily dismember a person or another object. Nanmaru follows his advice and creates his first sphere. Seeing its size, Takashi runs for water and, trying to pour it over the sphere, breaks the bucket. He then convinces the boy that they are chosen. All of this is witnessed by Nanmaru's classmate, Aki. Later, Nanmaru writes to Sachiko, and she advises him to stay away from her brother. At the cafe in Marakawa, unknown men in black suits arrive, which the owner immediately reports to the town leader. He orders everyone to keep their mouths shut. On the same day, the professor calls Emi, apologizes, and tells her that his window has opened. He assures her that he didn't kill anyone and says goodbye to her. In Tokyo, a meeting takes place with a politician who wants to run for a higher office. While he is speaking to the assembled crowd, a man with a masked face enters the university building and places his long-fingered hands against the wall. Suddenly, a huge black sphere appears on stage, right in front of the politician. The man reaches out to it, and his body is immediately sliced in half. Meanwhile, Emi returns to Tokyo, and Nanmaru demonstrates his new abilities, which frightens his friends. After all, this is how the murder in Marakawa happened. That night, Sachiko visits her grandfather, who has round marks on his arms and a stone grows in his forehead. Meanwhile, the person who ordered the politician's murder, known as the Baron, watches the footage of the event and praises his subordinate for coming up with such a way to dispose of an undesirable person, but the murder in Marakawa was unnecessary. Therefore, he needs someone more obedient. That morning, Takashi comes to Nanmaru again to suggest that he participate in a project to train people in superpowers. A significant number of people attend this paid seminar. Under Takashi's guidance, Nanmaru demonstrates his power by smashing a metal statue. This causes unprecedented excitement among the audience. Nanmaru himself is delighted with the fee he received, unaware that Takashi and his accomplice, host Yokihara, earned hundreds of times more. The guys discuss Nanmaru's foolishness, not noticing that Aki is recording their conversation. That evening, the Baron is informed that one of the achievers lives in Tokyo. Meanwhile, Nanmaru notices a strange growth on his forehead. At the same time, Emi continues studying the professor's papers and suddenly seems to see him. Murakami reminds her that Tanabata was first celebrated on April 29th, and so it has always been, but it's already May now. Emi rushes to check the records and realizes that the dates have changed. In the Western Gregorian calendar they coincide, including the very first, but this calendar was only introduced in 1582, and only in Catholic countries. But how could it have appeared in Morikawa? Meanwhile, Nanmaru continues participating in seminars, supposedly teaching people superpowers. The boy tries to explain that not everyone can do this, but no one believes him. Then Aki lets him listen to the recording she made. Nanmaru refuses to participate in the seminars, explaining that his power is not meant for deceit. Meanwhile, in Morikawa, Sachiko meets a masked man at her mother's grave, whom she calls Lord Yoriyuki Murakami. At the evening gathering, the town leader reports to Sachiko's grandfather about a group of outsiders looking for achievers in their town. He reminds them of the rules: no one should know the village's secret. The next day, Yoriyuki is brought to the Baron. The achiever demands that the village be left alone, but the Baron claps his hands and 4 armed men run out of the neighboring rooms. However, Yoriyuki is much faster, and all fall with pierced heads. He agrees to work temporarily for the Baron and removes the mask from his face. The Baron is horrified to see a completely inhuman face. Meanwhile, Nanmaru continues to look for a job where he could properly use his power. Suddenly, he hears calls for help. Passers-by have found a child in a locked car. They locate the mother, but she has lost her keys and cannot open the vehicle. Seeing the boy losing consciousness from the heat, Nanmaru uses his powers to smash the car's window. People are impressed, and the mother thanks the savior. Later, he sees a news report about the incident, but these same shots catch the attention of Takashi in Yokihara. They begin vandalizing the signs of establishments with problems. TV reports about them start to appear, raising social issues. Everyone discusses the unknown boy, whom they nickname Chisel. The police start an investigation. The Baron is displeased with the commotion, but Yoriyuki assures him that he knows who is responsible. Meanwhile, in Morikawa, people believe that Takashi is behind all this. Sachiko's grandfather and the professor ask the girl to go to Tokyo. Following his friend's advice, Nanmaru decides to become a janitor, thinking he could simply destroy the trash. However, the group soon notices that the mark on his forehead grows with each use of his power. One day, Sachiko arrives in Tokyo. She confesses to Emi that the town lied. The professor was there all along. Now he hands his assistant a letter of apology through Sachiko. She explains that all the town's residents have been having nightmares. Their conversation is interrupted by Nanmaru's arrival. The girl notices the mark on his forehead, but the boy doesn't understand her hints. He points out the place where Takashi might be. At another seminar where Takashi continues to deceive people, a delegation from the town arrives and demands that these activities stop. Takashi, pointing at Nanmaru, accuses the boy of wanting to monopolize the gift, and no matter how much Nanmaru yells trying to explain the truth, people don't listen. Then Sachiko steps forward. She accuses her brother of lying and calls him a killer. Takashi raises his hands as if preparing to create a sphere, but at that moment a loud pop is heard and a huge hole appears in the window. Yoriyuki, standing below, calls Takashi to him and the latter runs down. He orders Takashi to stop deceiving people, but the seminar attendees don't want that, so Yoriyuki instantly creates a massive sphere and blows off part of the roof. He explains that no one can develop this gift, even after thousands of years of training, and shows his hands. But upon noticing Nanmaru, he suddenly declares that the boy must be erased. Sachiko shields him with her body, and the blow strikes the ground. Later, the townspeople explain to Nanmaru that Yoriyuki Murakami would have been the ruler of the settlement in ancient times. Now he eliminates disobedient telekinetics. That's why he took Takashi away. Uncontrolled power is a threat to the village's existence. Nanmaru doesn't understand. Hasn't anyone ever used the gift for good? But he is abruptly cut off. Later, Sachiko and Nanmaru have dinner together, and he shows her Tokyo at night. Nanmaru receives his first job order for trash removal. That night, Sachiko asks for permission to stay with him. She explains that the village residents fear the dark side of the gift and shows Nanmaru her back, scarred and disfigured. The girl also shows him a family photo that includes Yoriyuki, who once looked like a normal person and loved her mother. However, according to village customs, the girl was married off to another. Her father couldn't accept that his children exhibited a weak power, constantly harassing his son and forcing him to train. Her mother, tired of the constant strife, asked Yoriyuki, who had become the mountain's priest, for help. He began training Takashi, who eventually created his first sphere. The boy started visiting the priest frequently, which didn't please his father. After gaining his gift, Takashi became aggressive and took out his anger on his little sister. When everyone was on the verge of breaking down, Sachiko began having dreams. One day she overheard an argument between her father and Takashi in the garden and caught her brother standing over her father's bloodied body. Takashi insisted he didn't do it, but their mother expelled him from the house. The grandfather and the village residents covered up the incident. One day, her mother went to the mountain, asking the girl to bring Yoriyuki, who had already lost his human form. On the way, she talked about her nightmares, but he confessed that everyone saw them. They reached the mountain, where her mother left this world. Afterward, Yoriyuki left the village, only returning when he learned that a developer wanted to desecrate the mountain. Takashi wouldn't have been able to do it, being too small-minded and self-centered. She's glad that Nanmaru sees the gift in a positive light. Meanwhile, the police start investigating the disappearance of their officers. One detective constantly recalls the incident on stage and meets Aki, who insists that the spatial sphere is no mere trick. Suddenly, Nanmaru suggests to his friends that they shut down the project, believing the gift is too great for mere trash removal. Later, he goes to see Emmi, who tells him that she found a few strange phrases about the solar years in the professor's letter. She compared the facts and realized that the village used a solar, not a Gregorian, calendar. During the festival, the solstice was always present. Thus, the Tanabata festival lasted 3 days before the solstice, 1 day during it, and 3 days after. Nanmaru later takes a job with a cleaning company. Meanwhile, Aki suggests that the detective team up with her to investigate the unexplained incidents. That night, Nanmaru has his first nightmare, where he falls into a void. Suddenly, he hears Sachiko screaming, begging him not to approach the other side. Ahead, he sees an opening door and wakes up. The next day, a car, a boat, and a plane disappear in the city. Aki and the detective track down Yoriyuki, who arrives to meet Takashi and warn him about the danger of opening windows. However, Aki and the detective are caught by the Baron's men. Yoriyuki then demonstrates the disappearance of a prominent politician right at the door of a nearby building. The guards drag in the bound Aki and the detective, but Yoriyuki leaves, not considering them important. Meanwhile, Nanmaru starts work, clearing old items from an office. Suddenly, he realizes that these items were precious to someone and have a history. He runs to the roof where the others are working and asks for permission to leave some things in the building. His co-worker agrees and begins asking Nanmaru about his abilities. At that moment, they see a massive sphere floating above the city. The next moment, it bursts and erases several buildings. It turns out Yoriyuki is doing this a few blocks away. Seeing the explosion, people mistake it for a terrorist attack. Panic ensues. Nanmaru runs with everyone else and suddenly finds himself in a field strewn with the bodies of medieval warriors. But before he can be scared, he returns to his time. Yoriyuki tells Takashi that he will soon put an end to the nightmares. Meanwhile, in the village, Sachiko hears an announcement about the disappearance of 200 people in the destroyed buildings. Her grandmother doesn't believe Yoriyuki did it. After all, he was the protector of the people, but many eyewitnesses saw the massive black sphere and no one else possesses such power. Sachiko asks her mother for help. Nanmaru continues having nightmares, where Sachiko begs him not to approach the windows, or else he will find himself on the other side. The next day, the government declares a quarantine and asks everyone to stay home. Meanwhile, in the village, people discuss the events, not believing that their Yoriyuki could have done such a thing. Meanwhile, the detective regains consciousness and finds that they are in some basement. Sachiko's grandfather contacts Emmi, after which she decides to go to Markawa. Nanmaru finds Takashi in his room. He accuses him of killing people, but Takashi explains that Yoriyuki wants to end the nightmares. He suddenly asks the boy to do him a favor and convey his apologies to Sachiko. Nanmaru admits that his sister doesn't consider him a killer, and that turns out to be the most important thing for him. At the same time, Yoriyuki decides to break off the deal with the Baron and informs his bodyguard. Before leaving, Takashi gives Nanmaru a piece of paper with the address and plan of the place where Aki and the detective are being held. He goes there and arrives just as one of the bodyguards forces the detective to shoot Aki. But then the Baron calls, ordering him to come immediately. Nanmaru distracts the remaining guard by creating a sphere and tries to free the captives. However, there is another guard who points a weapon at him. The detective tries to interfere, and the gun falls, wounding the guard. The men struggle, and Nanmaru creates a sphere, preparing to send it at the guard. But Aki screams, the boy comes to his senses, and he breaks through the wall. He frees the captives and leads them out. Later, he notices that the stone in his forehead has grown and realizes that he almost killed someone recently. Meanwhile, Yoriyuki tells the Baron that he needs to experiment with the sphere's precision and flight range. After he leaves, the Baron realizes the danger of the monster and plans to go to the Prime Minister. But at that moment, the city center is engulfed by a giant sphere, and a massive hole in the ground appears where the building stood. The next day, all channels broadcast news of the deaths of people in the newly formed craters. The government urges residents to stay home. However, Nanmaru goes to meet his friends, who are joined by Aki. Namaru recalls Yoriyuki's words about getting rid of the nightmare and promises to go all the way to find out what he meant. Gathering together, the group heads to Marikawa, where they are met by Sachiko and a delegation of locals. Namaru recounts Yoriyuki's words about the nightmares, but none of the locals hurry to explain. Emi then sternly urges them to avoid another incident with the loss of lives. She wants to know what the windows are, why the Tanabata festival is needed, and what the role of the mountain priest is. However, the villagers admit that they don't understand Yoriyuki's plan. Namaru loses his temper. He respects the town's customs, but the power of the mountain kills, and Yoriyuki is a killer. The town leader promises to introduce the group to the master, Sachiko's grandfather. He also plans to invite Professor Murakami to the meeting. In the morning, Yoriyuki and Takashi arrive at the master's estate. The maid greets the guests and rushes to warn the master of the unexpected visitors. The old man immediately accuses Yoriyuki of killing the official, but Yoriyuki reminds him that the man wanted to destroy the sacred mountain by turning it into a golf course. Yoriyuki has found answers to his questions and is ready to break the rules. The pair are about to leave, but suddenly the visitor stops. He senses armed men hiding in the yard and prepares to fight. The Baron's men open fire, but the bullets don't touch Yoriyuki. The maid rushes to her master. Meanwhile, Nanmaru's group walks along the road leading to the estate. Sachiko tells Nanmaru that the locals fear him. Deep down, they are vassals. The town leader thanks Tagai for the model of their area, saying the professor told him it helped solve the problem. At this time, in the master's house, Yoriyuki distributes the exits to attack the enemy from different sides. Meanwhile, soldiers burst into the master's bedroom and open fire. Yoriyuki tears them apart with a sphere. Namaru's friends hear the shots and run to the estate. The Baron's assistant brings in reserve troops and orders the estate to be surrounded. Yoriyuki and Takashi are caught in a circle. They stand back to back, grow spheres, and kill the soldiers. Yoriyuki creates a whole bunch of spheres. One of the soldiers, dying, shoots Takashi. When Nanmaru's group arrives at the estate, they find a pile of bodies. The old master, dying, orders them to stop Yoriyuki. Namaru and Sachiko step into the yard as the Baron's men leave the estate. Yoriyuki is leading the wounded Takashi along the forest path, but the boy is getting worse. Eventually, he falls and dies. Namaru and Sachiko also find the forest path and soon see Takashi's body. Sachiko takes her brother's death hard. Meanwhile, Emi finds a handprint on the door with long fingers, belonging, according to legend, to the monster Kasasagi. Later, the group returns to the town, where they are unexpectedly stopped by Sachiko's grandmother, who asks Nanmaru to go with her, as she received an order from the new master, Professor Murakami, to protect the boy. He ends up at Sachiko's house. In the evening, the young people meet on the veranda. Sachiko asks him to be careful and offers sweet sake, which helps with nightmares. She believes that the dead turn into stars in the sky. The distance between them is vast. No matter how much you scream, no one will hear you, and the loneliest thing is your own death when you are the only one stepping out of the window. The girl talks about her nightmares where she is searching for someone. Unexpectedly, she finds herself on a mountain where she feels the presence of someone beyond the Milky Way, and they extend a hand to her. Namaru grabs her hand and confesses that Takashi regretted his behavior. Sachiko, however, hopes that her brother did not go into the darkness alone. That night, Emi struggles to sleep, replaying everything that happened in her mind. The next day, despite the police's order to stay indoors, the men of Marikawa arrange a meeting, not noticing that Aki is recording their conversation, which he later shows to Emi. The friends discover that there are no news reports anywhere about the massacre in the town and decide to go to the meeting. Meanwhile, the police knock on Sachiko's grandmother's door, searching for Nanmaru, but the girl leads him out through the back door. However, Nanmaru is convinced that the police are looking for Yoriyuki. In the evening, the residents on their way to the meeting are stopped by the police. A confrontation ensues, which Emi and her students observe. Then the Baron's men arrive, also seeking to capture Yoriyuki, but the residents refuse to hand over their priest. The Baron's assistant fires a shot over their heads, claiming that Yoriyuki possesses a terrifying power that could destroy the planet. At this point, Nanmaru intervenes, suggesting they meet with Yoriyuki first to let him explain his actions. When people start shouting again, he creates a sphere. Nanmaru admits that he doesn't know why he has such abilities, but there can be no talk of betrayal by the town. Then Professor Murakami steps out from the crowd. Emi is horrified to see the enormous stone in his forehead and faints. Namaru is at a city council meeting. He asks them to agree that he will convince Yoriyuki to talk to the police and the Baron's men. Guards will wait for him on the mountain to persuade him to leave the town without harming its residents. Later, he informs his friends that the professor wants to meet with them in his laboratory. In the morning, the team goes to Murakami. They gather around the model, and the professor begins his explanation. The village festival was established and held for 7 days during Tanabata, the summer solstice. In Chinese history, from which this festival originated, it symbolized a magpie that bridged the Milky Way. It was also on the Lord's flag, but it turns out that magpies didn't exist in Japan at that time, so it must have been something similar. The professor asks Tagai to help him, smears his hand with ink, and asks him to make a handprint. He then shows Yoriyuki's handprint left at the master's estate and aligns them in a specific order. The group immediately recalls the Lord's emblem in the Morikawa Museum. It looks as though a long-fingered hand is passing a sphere to a human hand. The professor asks them to look at the model. Tagai immediately notices that the mountains seem artificial and that Tanabata takes place on the solstice days when a second sunset can be seen. Murakami simulates the sunset during the solstice, and the group is surprised to see 2 hands and a black sphere between them in the mountainous landscape. The professor marvels at the unknown master's creation, an enormous earth sculpture spanning several kilometers. One might consider that it was created by the Kasasagi, who appeared in this area, perhaps from the sky. How would people have reacted to this? After all, according to the peasants' beliefs, the entire land was inhabited by gods, and they couldn't always distinguish between good and evil. The Kasasagi, who became gods to them, began visiting this planet regularly, as mentioned in many tales and legends. And if you look at Mount Murakami, you can see that it resembles a helicopter landing pad, so the festival torches served as guiding lights. The festival itself began as a ceremony to welcome the gods during the summer solstice, but at some point, the Kasasagi stopped appearing. Yet for thousands of years, people continued to meet them, even though they never came. However, the town became trapped in its beliefs. Invisible chains keep the initiates in one place. Fear and loneliness are what lie beyond the window, and the window openers have to wait for the Kasasagi. The professor and Sachiko are among those the visitors learned to reach thousands of years ago, using their minds. The large flag on the mountain most likely symbolizes loyalty and a reminder that one should not leave this earth. For this, fear is instilled in the window openers. That's why the locals have protected this mountain for every era. It's hard to believe, but it's unknown whether the Kasasagi will ever return. They may have died long ago. The next morning, the guards on the mountain come out for breakfast, and later Emi and her students arrive. The professor is concerned about their well-being and suggests they all go to the city, but Nanmaru refuses. He feels obligated to be the first to meet Yoriyuki. Murakami supports his decision as the townspeople need protection. Each generation of priests has ingrained the sacred duty into their minds, but the professor is the only one who thought to create a model and can now visually show people what is really happening here. They light bonfires to show Yoriyuki that there are people here. After all, he most likely wants to destroy the mountain. That would end everything, but the people are becoming hostages. In the evening, the students and Nanmaru go on watch. The boy asks Sachiko about her dreams and suggests they leave this place to start a new life. Moreover, he feels something for her. At that moment, the Baron's men appear. They haven't waited for Yoriyuki and demand to know where he is, otherwise they'll start killing the townspeople. The professor is outraged and even creates a sphere, but then one of the Baron's soldiers shoots his comrades and removes his helmet, revealing himself to be Yoriyuki. Those who haven't seen his form before scream in fear. The Baron's assistant tries to shoot him and immediately dies from a sphere. Yoriyuki admits that he always imagined the black sphere as a trash chute. He simply pushed those who posed a threat to the village into it. But now, he doubts that. The ancestors, the Kasasagi, might have contacted their descendants many times, but most of them didn't develop the ability to leave with them unharmed. He believes that his ancestors were from other stars. They possessed knowledge and logic foreign to Earthlings. But what if it's not a window but a gate? And by entering the sphere, you can be transported to the ancestors' planet? That's why he changed his plans. At that moment, people see a huge black sphere above their heads. Yoriyuki announces that he intends to leave with the Kasasagi. Sachiko suddenly asks him to take her with him. The dark world is calling to her, and she wants to find peace. Nanmaru reminds her of her dreams. The girl reaches out, and through the darkness, she sees an inhuman hand beckoning her from another reality. But just as she is about to grasp it, Nanmaru grabs her wrist. Yoriyuki shakes his head. Nanmaru will never understand the feelings of the window openers. The boy agrees, but he doesn't like that the girl is ready to go into the afterlife without experiencing even a small part of this vast world. Here there is wisdom, mistakes, and attempts to start over. The world is thousands of years old, and compared to that, all superpowers are insignificant. He doesn't want her to leave and asks her to stay. The girl agrees. She remembers how her mother once left for the sphere. Yoriyuki also recalls that moment and promises to wait for her. The sphere begins to grow, and Nanmaru orders everyone to run. The people rush down the mountain while Yoriyuki stands under the sphere, waiting for it to consume him. A massive explosion occurs. Nanmaru's team manages to take cover in the forest, and the town's electricity goes out. Time passes. Tagai enrolls in graduate school. Emi and Murakami resign from the department and now live together in Marikawa. Aki has become an independent internet journalist and now lives with the former policeman. The people of Marikawa quickly reconstructed the area where the mountain once stood. Nanmaru has opened a company where people exchange items without using money. It's strange but highly successful. He no longer uses his abilities, which means his appearance will remain unchanged. One day he goes to Marikawa, where a festival is scheduled to take place in the evening. After all, the festival continues in the hope that someone will come from the Milky Way, and Sachiko lives in her house, always waiting for Nanmaru. The series is based on the manga by Hitoshi Iwaki, the author of the famous Parasite. While the middle of the plot may drag a bit, the finale ties everything together and thoroughly explains the events on screen, which is a rare feat in modern cinema.